Happy Mardi Gras.
Right.
Happy
So
Mardi
tonight
Gras.
we have a guest that is, I would say, more connected to Mardi Gras than the king cake. Uh,
I feel like it. I'm old enough.
she has been a captain. She's been a maid. She's been a queen. She's been a treasurer of a captain's club at one point.
Mhm.
Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we have Melody Kirkwood from the crew, the Knights of Jason. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I love talking about Jason.
So, for starters, there was two different renditions of Jason,
Two different
And-
charters.
and you were lucky enough to take part in both charters.
Yes.
So, tell us a little bit about the first one. I know that it was founded in what, 64?
That sounds about right. 64, 65. And it was the original charter was for Knights of Jason, I think, Incorporated. One of us is incorporated and one of us isn't. And that's the difference in the name for the registration through the state of Louisiana. But it was founded in Harahan by some gentlemen who, let me just say this in the beginning, that the first crew, I was very young. So I have my memories of what my participation was in a crew, but since it was all male crew back then, I'm sure there's a few living members, because when I did the second charter, I tried to find the living captains from the past, because I wanted permission, I wanted permission to use the crest and to use the name again. But the original gentleman, I believe, came from the crew of Carrollton. They wanted to start a crew, and the crew of Zeus, because they wanted more than one Mardi Gras crew in Jefferson Parish, because Zeus was the first of the major crews, let's put it that way. And when it started, it was just a bunch of friends and businessmen that got together. There's one other captain that I know of that's still alive, and I believe it's either Bill or Ed Renton. I always got confused because they were brothers. They looked alike, and one of them is still alive. One of the Rentons is still alive. In fact, there's a policeman named Jason Renton, and I can remember when his mother was pregnant with him, and she named him after Jason. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, he's a Jefferson Parish policeman that is very involved with Archbishop Rummel and with Mardi Gras. But the original crew was all men. The floats they used, which I didn't know until after I had my business agreements and I went to Jefferson Parish Council to get approval, that the first crew did the same thing that I did. They rented their floats from Carrollton. And what's really kind of neat about those floats, the bodies of the floats are from the 1930s garbage trucks in New Orleans.
Yeah.
So the tires, one thing I liked about it, I would never have a flat tire because the tires are solid rubber. So we could parade in rain, snow, sleet, and our floats were going to roll. But I rented my floats from Carrollton, and so did the original crew. So there's still every now and then, and on the internet, if you really dig, you'll see a couple of pictures. And I think the Tom's Picayune had a couple of pictures of their first crew, and you could see that the standards of the floats back then are not even close to what the standards are now. Because like I can remember my dad, basically I could see about his calves all the way up.
Oh,
So-
yeah. That's one thing that I noticed watching like the WYES documentaries and, footage from past parades is that, all of the floats,
Oh, sorry.
it
The
was,
safety standards weren't kind of an afterthought.
No standards at all. Believe me, I'll tell you a story a little bit later about what happened to us with those standards one year. But yeah, so when you look at the floats and the costumes were a little bit more theme oriented than they are today. And I can remember as a little girl, the things my daddy had me do. Let me go back. My dad was first vice president for the original crew for about 4 or 5 years. He was a float lieutenant, and back then the float lieutenants had to put together their own floats. And I can remember an uncle and some cousins. And in fact, that's the only memories I have of them. I never saw them after Jason. But so my dad was originally a member, then he went to be a float lieutenant, and then my mom pushed him. My dad had fun, but it was really my mom that was, she, in fact, ended up being historian for Jason. And I can remember in our den, besides she was an avid balloon collector. And I mean, this woman went to every parade, no matter if it was snowing, raining.
We still
and
do
she-
Oh yeah,
She would step on your fingers if you were on a doubloon. If she didn't have that doubloon, she stepped on your hand and she got it. But she really pushed my dad in because I don't know why my mom never joined a female crew, but she never did. And she never wanted to ride, but she always wanted to go to every ball. And one year she had an invitation to every ball. And that was her claim to glory. But she's the one who really pushed my dad. And my dad, like I said, he was a crew member, went to a float lieutenant, and then got elected first vice president. And technically, my dad was in it until 73, 74. And technically on 74, the captain, and I think at the time, and again, I apologize, I don't know if it was Bill or Ed that was captain, but one of the Rentons resigned. And so technically for about 2 weeks, my dad was captain. But then my dad ended up resigning in 74. So he was, oh my God, I mean, my dad just passed away last year. My dad was almost 100 when he passed away. But the stories that he had, not only from World War II and such, because you know how those old guys were, he had a ton of stories with Jason. And I wish, in 1997, my parents' house burned down. When it burned down, we lost all of our costumes from the 70s. And my sisters were maids. I was a lady in waiting. I was a page. My sister was a page. So that was our involvement in the crew. And my mom was in the woman's auxiliary. And so I can't tell you how many cars she washed to help raise money, and how many cake sales they had. In fact, I've lost so many pictures, but I wish I had a picture of one of the fundraisers they did. The guys, they had this girl come out. It was at the Farhead Grotto. Do you remember where that?
Oh, yeah.
River Road. And they had a beautiful runway made, and they sold tickets and had drinks and everything. And so the first young lady came out dressed all prim and proper. Then the next person came out was the captain dressed in drag. And then my dad was dressed in drag. And then all the officers were dressed in drag. The things that they got away with and did back then, you know, to raise money, it was hilarious. But, you know, no, as far as I can remember, and again, I was young, there wasn't a lot of issues by having an all-man crew or having an all-female crew. There weren't people trying to break that up back then. So these guys just got
they had
together.
some participation though, right? Maybe they
Yeah.
couldn't ride, but there was still, I mean,
Right.
members of the crew in a large
Right.
part.
The females, we were
They
in the
wouldn't have
court.
survived without them most of the time.
Exactly. The female side of it was the women's auxiliary to help raise money towards the expenses of the crew, and then the court. And so I was in the court. My sisters were all in the court. It was like my maiden name is Cook, Melody Cook. And I can't tell you how many years went by and there was always a cook in the court, you know, because my dad always made sure that one of us was in there. But I guess they used to call me my dad's shadow. So when the floats would line up on Jefferson Highway and they were tilting, like there was a canal and they lined up and put the floats on the side and they would tilt like this. Well, they would try the lights out. Melody, go climb to the top of the float and change the light bulb. That's what I remember. Scared to death. I did anything my dad told me to do, but I was the light bulb changer. Um, but the original crew was a lot of fun. Um, it got to the point where, well, there's a couple of stories I really can't pass on.
No, you can tell us, so we're all right with it.
Let's just put it this way. Some of the members of the crew were very friendly with other members of the crew.
Oh, she's
Wow.
a tease. Oh, I
Okay.
don't know about this one.
Yeah, and it wasn't, God, I mean, I could get killed for using some of the language that we, but it wasn't gay. It was, male, female, but there was a lot of that going on. And that's part of why the crew disbanded, actually. From what I understood, I mean, the crew went 2 more years after my dad left, and it basically went co-ed, and they couldn't make it work. Sometimes a crew gets to a point where the people who are, and I found this in Jefferson Parish, the people who are really the Mardi Gras people, the people that started it, the people that know the history of Mardi Gras, the people that want to carry on the traditions, at a point, some of them got fed up. And when those people leave the crew, I found that the crews didn't really last that much longer.
Well, yeah, we've seen that, I guess, with a lot of Metairie crews of late. They've kind of dropped like flies, unfortunately, but you can see them, particularly Caesar, was once such a beautiful parade and just tickered off over the years. And you could tell as soon as Captain had passed or retired
Well,
from it, the family didn't want to deal
Bob,
with it anymore.
right. Bob and his wife did a ton of work on Caesar all the time. They had a really good plan. I don't know, I know a lot about them, but I don't know all the little gritty details. But like Caesar bought a house, and if Caesar had money trouble, they took a mortgage out on the house, or they took a lien out on the house, and then they used the money with the crew, and then they paid it back. I don't know if Bob still owns it or the crew still owns it, but
I know they had liquidated out most of their floats and all, so I don't
they
know
sold the
what's left
floats
of it.
before they even announced that they were not parading.
That's right. Yeah.
That
was kind of the announcement, really.
Yeah, when he went out, he went out.
Well, it seemed like the family didn't want to continue it,
It was a lot of work.
Which is a shame because it was such a beautiful parade,
Oh,
It was really
absolutely. A couple of occasions, I actually went and helped make flowers. Of like a few weeks before the parade, they would, because that's when the floats were in Harahan. They were in a warehouse in Harahan, and I was actually, I was just divorced from my husband, and I was dating a float lieutenant. And so he would, hey, come on out and help us with this. And I would, because I love Mardi Gras. And the more I'm happiest when I'm around floats. I don't know why. It's weird.
Did he steal your heart by telling you he was like a float lieutenant? You were like, oh man, we have to see each other again.
Well, he was also my bodyguard when I was captain.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I knew him for long story. That's another. Yeah, we're not going to that one, but
I do like the story about your mother kind of pushing your dad, because that's the absolute opposite of, I would think, 90% of families here. My dad's been a doubloon collector forever and kept up my grandmother's set, and now we're keeping up that set with him, even though he still goes to every parade.
You would have really died to see my mom's collection.
My dad's is incredible. I actually have like a card catalog from Tulane in my kitchen that is the spares of his collection.
Oh my God.
Which has a Jason drawer, by the way.
Yeah.
Very good. Good taste.
So
do you have all of the well, actually no one, only Will Clark, myself. We might be the only twos that actually have every Jason doubloon from when I was captain.
I was going to ask if you needed some, because I had quite a bit of spares. I pulled out yesterday just to look at what years I had, but I had 65 through 76 or 77. I didn't have any of the modern ones, unfortunately, but my dad
Oh,
might.
well, you're gonna have to send me your address and I can fix you up.
Ooh, all right.
Ooh.
I'll check with my dad because he might have some in his set. I don't know. Like the set I have is the spare.
Yeah, a lot of mine,
No telling.
well, there's one doubloon. If you actually come across it, I'd be interested in knowing where you got it from because the was the first year.
The undated one.
Well, this would have been 2004.
Oh, okay. Second
Um,
group.
my son was my junior captain. Let me take this virtual background off and show you something. Okay. The black costume behind me. You can see, I don't know if you can see the helmet.
Yeah.
And well, this is one of my capes, or my train. This is my train for my second year. That right there is my son's costume. My son was officially the junior captain. He had his own float starting the second year and bodyguards and everything. And I'll tell you why we had to have bodyguards. And then that's my first costume. It's just really hard to see. It's really heavy. I can't. It's probably about 40 pounds because it's all rhinestones and lame. But he wanted something really well. Let me back up a little bit. My goal as a mother is to embarrass my son as much as I can in life.
That's a great goal.
And I've told him this
Share
his
that
entire life.
philosophy.
Yeah. So when I started Jason, one of the reasons why I agreed to bring Jason back was because in 2001, I was queen of the Krewe Pygmalion. And then I wasn't too happy with the way the crew was being run. And the guy who was actually president of Pygmalion at that time kind of felt the same way I did. So about a week after we rode, he calls me and says, "Look, I want to start another crew, but in Jefferson Parish, and I want you to be president." And I was like, I don't know. Thought about it and said, okay, what the heck, I'll do it. And that was the crew of Triton of Jefferson.
Mhm.
So Triton actually, his name was Robbie, and Robbie actually went to a captain's meeting. Mr. Trapani gave him permission, and they were going to give Triton a permit to roll. But Robbie really didn't do what he needed to do to build this crew. Now, I brought in members, and I had enough for about 2 floats. And when I didn't see that this was a real serious situation or serious project, I really stopped recruiting. I went to Mac Cantrell and I said, Mac, I got 2 floats worth of people. Can I put them in Thor? Would you let me have 2 floats in your parade so these people can roll, so they can ride? And he said, yeah. So we actually rode in Thor that year. And we were actually separate from them because I had a pre-parade dinner at Salvatore's. So we had the Continental Trailway type buses pick up these 2 floats of people after they had a dinner at Salvatore's and got on 2 floats of Thor and we rode in Thor. After Thor, I could see that I kept questioning what we were doing with Triton. And basically, long story short, Robbie didn't like the type of people, and I meant by age group, not the people themselves. He wanted more of a young 20s hip type crew where the people that actually came out and wanted to ride were families. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had this woman that called me one day and said, look, I don't care what kind of parade you start, but when you start your first parade, I want to be your first queen. She goes, I've got to be a queen. And so I said, okay. So at that point, my high school band director, who I was still very close with, my husband, I was still married at the time, and my dad took me aside one night, sat me down in the kitchen and said, look, you have all the connections now. You know all the people. You can get contracts and a business plan together to make a successful crew. You need to do it now. And this was in 2003. in like April of 2003. I'm like, y'all are nuts. I'm not doing this by myself. I know how much work is involved. I got to work. It's not like I'm a woman of leisure and have all this time.
Right.
I
Yeah.
actually worked, had a young child, and I said, I got to think about this. So I went to work the next morning, and it's rolling, and I'm trying to figure out. I love Mardi Gras. I love being around floats. It's my thing. So should I do this or not? On the way home, I said, hey, if I do this, I don't have to reinvent the wheel. I can I can get permission to use Jason's name, use Jason's crest, and build on Jason. And so
Right.
I got home and I called my daddy. Said, Daddy, what do you think? You're a past officer of Jason. Would you mind if I brought back this crest and if I paraded under that name? And I said, I'll try to find any living captain to see how they feel. And that's what I did. There was another captain at the time, but an older captain. I think his last name was Poche. I think he's passed now. Um, but I contacted anybody that I could think of that was involved in the original crew to make sure they weren't going to come back and say, once I had this crest and I went public and I started recruiting,
Yeah.
I didn't want to come back and say, oh, you can't use this, you can't do that. Because I remember what happened with Romulus and Remus. Do y'all remember them? They paraded for
I
Briefly.
two
remember them
years.
coming back and trying to, kind of a big brouhaha
Right,
happening
they
of it,
couldn't incorporate the name because there was a major company that goes by the name of Romulus and Remus.
Mhm.
So because they couldn't incorporate it, that's when they changed it to Argus.
Oh,
My dad was the first parade marshal for Romulus and Remus.
Hmm.
So I was in the little limousine doing this, or the convertible.
So
Everybody
that
was
was
convertibles back then.
that was a Slidell parade, correct?
No, it was
Was
Kenner.
it? It was Kenner.
Kenner.
Okay.
And then that's when they moved after there was two Romulus and Remus that rode through Kenner, and then that was I think, and then 75, either 75 or it was 75 was the first parade on the traditional veterans route.
Mhm.
So that's when and they moved and the name changed to Argus.
So
I
did
believe it was 75. I was really young. I would have been 14 at the time.
so did
So
Jason ever do the old Metairie route, or did they go straight
yeah,
from Harahan to um the
the
I guess
older
the now
crew,
traditional route?
right? The older crew, I believe, paraded 1 or 2 years on Metairie Road. That would have been
Okay.
after my dad was out. They went from the Jefferson Highway route to Metairie, and then everybody went to veterans. They didn't have a
Right.
choice. But I don't believe the old crew ever paraded on veterans.
Hmm.
I think Mike Jason was the first one to go on that.
To slightly get off of topic, but
Yeah,
we're still talking about it. With last year we saw ISIS move to Kenner. Over the past few years, you've heard more and more talk of a couple of the parades wanting to return to the old Metairie route. Within the past 5 years or so, they changed up the Metairie route to
Mhm.
going opposite of the traditional
yeah.
way. What are your thoughts on more and more parades trying to move to almost like a neighborhood uh, route as opposed to, due to lack of better words, like the commercialized route that veterans has become, to where, New Orleans really has, let's face it, there's two routes. There's the Endymion route, and then there's St. Charles.
Right.
And then in Metairie, there's really one route. Well, now there's two. The Kenner route and the the veterans route.
Well, when I originally brought back Jason, I had looked at Kenner, not for very long. We were debating on it for maybe about a week because I lived in Kenner. I grew up in Kenner. Um, I live in Slidell now, but that's just a recent move. I've only been in Slidell maybe 3 years. But Kenner was my thing. I knew everybody who was on the council. I knew most of the policemen because I grew up with them. We
Right.
all went to school together. I lived in University City, or then I bought a house in Driftwood, and and I was editor for the Driftwood Bark, so I knew. I mean, that was my gang, right? Those are my people. And in fact, I'll be 60 next month, and I still we still have a group of girls that hang around together. In fact, Sunday we're going to look at the house floats. We have a bus rented. We've been knowing each other for over 50 years. It's like 40 women, and we get together and we go to eat and everything. So Kenner was really where I had kind of hoped to start, Jason. Um, but we couldn't clarify a route. We just couldn't. We had to cut off one neighborhood or cut off another neighborhood, and we just couldn't make it work. So that's when, and at that time I was doing a lot of fundraising. My other passion is volunteerism. I don't know the word no, or I know it now. I didn't know it then. And so I worked on a lot of fundraisers with Harry Lee. Um, and so, I went to Harry, and I had to prove to the Jefferson Parish Council after being grilled for about 2.5 hours one day to make sure that I had everything in place that I could put on a multi-million-dollar event. That's because that's what
Right.
it comes down to. And then at the end of that meeting, they said, okay, well, if Harry approves, you can do it. So the day before Harry went to get his lap band surgery, he was laying on his sofa in his office. I was sitting on the floor next to him, talking about everything else but Mardi Gras. And then at the very end of the conversation, he goes, okay, look, you don't have the ego of these people. So can you really be a captain? And I said, absolutely. Now I used another word in there because that's the way we, and you got your permit. So that's how I got to Parade and Merit. As far as the way I feel or the routes, Harry Lee was really, from my knowledge, Harry Lee was the person who moved all the routes to veterans. And the reason he used for that was the police coverage, the overtime, the 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 cleanup. I forgot the public works department. By having this one route, it made sense for fire, garbage, police.
Yeah.
It made a constant, right? But what it did, I thought, was homogenized the crews in Metairie to where you knew what everyone was going to look like. They
Right.
were going to have a little dance team with their little costumes. You're going to have floats with hopefully people on them, because there's been at least 2 crews I know of that have put empty floats on the route. I sat behind one of them one year. My parade followed it. Um, I am all for the neighborhood. If you can get a good route to where it goes through a neighborhood. I used to love going up the Bonneville Loop
Yeah.
because we're actually, I don't know, I love the neighborhood aspect of it. You got to understand, from my perspective, I started in parades when I was 3 years old. No, I was 4. I was 4. I grew up in University City, and they had a civic association. And
Uh-huh.
every year on the 4th of July, they would do a parade. Well, I could go in my garage, and this is again, I think I inherited this from my mom. I blame her. I would get crepe paper and straws and decorate my bike, and I would ride all the way up to the front of the neighborhood where the parade would line up. And I would be in the parade. My parents would come out of the house, and I'd be waving at my parents. Oh yeah, I'm in it. I'll see y'all later. One year I was grounded and told I couldn't ride in a parade, and I snuck out of my house and did it.
Good
So
girl.
parades have been in my life all my life. So I
I
love,
actually miss just the like the school parades have all
yeah,
disappeared. Like
right.
even those I thought were fun. It was just in, I don't know, maybe circle a 2 block area, something like that.
Well, this was a couple of miles because it started at Loyola, went all the way down Ole
Mhm.
Miss to East Louisiana to Loyola, then to the parks. It was a few miles. In fact, one year, this is my mom pushing again. My mom took crepe paper. We had no money, okay? Poor as a church mouse. My mom took crepe paper and made a costume out of crepe paper for my dad and for me, and they rented a U-Haul, one of the ones that you can, pull, and they took crepe paper and they covered it, And my dad was Uncle Sam and I was Miss Liberty. And we rode through that parade. We got a trophy too for first place for being Uncle Sam and Miss Liberty. But I loved being able to walk or to be able to be in a parade in my neighborhood. So I'm all for that. The problem is when you're a captain, um, and let me just say this, I don't like the changes they made. I think reverse on the route is stupid, and I'm sorry I'm using the word. I don't think it makes any sense. They're, if you really want to be make it a fun Mardi Gras, okay, let some of the parades go back to the Metairie route, to the Metairie Road route, because that's more of a family. But the reason they don't is because of all the trees and the lights. The floats don't fit down the street very well. And what they
Right.
have to do for
But
the
that's,
Irish
I mean,
parade,
that's something that they've always had to deal with, whether it's even on St. Charles, they have to deal with trees.
oh yeah,
It's just, you just build around them. You know,
but
the float
Orleans Parish,
decorators know how to deal with that, you know.
right? But it costs money.
Well, I
Okay.
understand that, but like if you're, I mean, even like the rental floats, there's no reason that they can't just stick to under one size, right? You know, I don't know. To me, there's a way around it. Those guys, they have done it forever. They make changes on the fly constantly. And
Well, it's
personally, I would love the Metairie Road route because I live on North Holland and Boar where they used to line up. So I would love it.
yeah.
Like if they brought it there, I'd have the line up. I'd walk out, get my set of doubloons.
I hear you. And honestly, I think that's a more fun route.
Mhm.
I've been on floats, on crew floats. I've ridden every spot in a crew. I've been in it. I was captain one night. The next night, I was riding crew in a different crew. I used to ride a Napoleon. Even back in the days, I was in Heloise, Diana, Pandora, Amore, you name it. And I
Yeah.
rode in it because either my mom or my mama or a friend of a friend, I was in crews, maid, a president, captain, you name it. But I've been on crew floats on because I like riding on the top. When it's a double decker, put me in the last spot on the top. That's my domain. I love it. Um, because when I see my friends, I can scream at them and they can run behind the float, and I
Yeah.
still get to throw them something. But problem is that it comes down to money. When you're on that top deck and you're going down, even veterans, and you're turning from home to vets, you better duck
Yeah, there's a street
because
light
the
coming up.
lights. I've seen people get hit by those lights, and
Mhm.
that's the problem. They've just infrastructure on Metairie Road that would have to be changed.
I
But
mean,
again, it's
the
not that big of a deal because I mean, look, Zeus did the 50th anniversary parade on it, and
Right.
it went well. And then you've got the Irish parade that goes
yeah.
down there, and those are the same floats that the crews are using because most of them,
Mhm.
I think, they're Matt Cantrell's floats.
I
Yeah.
So
believe so.
yeah, because he's got the contract or something, and most people rent it from him. He's cheaper than going to Blaine Kern's floats or Kern. Um, but I don't know. I'm all for it. I just don't think that the change in direction makes any difference. I think it's more confusing. Um,
I like
I,
the idea of it initially. Like Pickle and I both ride Excalibur, and we actually took the first ride
uh,
that landed at that spot. And the first year we pulled up, and the Family Grille thing was in full swing, and it was real crowded. The crowds were deep, and to me that was fun. I like the idea of it. What I don't like is that you lose about a mile of parade. And a lot of my friends live further down the route this way that we no longer pass in front of any longer. So, you
But I
know,
will say that being literally 2 blocks from where we have to get onto the float
yeah.
is pretty nice. I live right here off of
uh,
Bonneville.
look,
So yeah, it's
I've been in parish meetings. They used to be the United Carnival Captains Club, and the captains would meet outside of meeting with Trapani and the parish council. So we had all of these different meetings we had to go to, but we would go to the United Carnival Captains Club to try to have one voice on when we were going to meet with the council, to have one voice where all the captains agreed to something, and it never happened. Um,
Well, the
the
route change
captains
was
will
certainly
never agree.
controversial. There was there was quite the fallout after that decision was made, and they've kind of let a few still go their traditional routes up the street, but I don't know.
You see, what some of
I'm
these
a
new
little
crews
indifferent
want to
to it,
do, what some of these new crews want to do, and honestly, I had an element in my crew that wanted to do it as well, and they want to be an Endymion. Okay. And what I mean by that is not, I mean, yeah, expand the size of the crew and have more floats and such. Build the big ones like Orpheus and, the signature floats, things like that. But anybody can do that. I mean, look at Caesar. They spent $1 million on the Hydra. It never worked.
Yeah.
Well, Lewis Massa could never get the heads to work with the steam coming out of them. The heads were always broken. But it was a beautiful float. I mean, it had the fiber
Yeah.
optics and everything on it. But what they want is the extravaganza, I'm sorry, at the end. So they want the floats to end somewhere that the floats can go through and you can have $1 million party at the end.
Yeah.
And Jefferson Parish has never been able to do that. I can tell you that with my Jason, how I did it for the little bit of money I charged, it was on a prayer every year, because my dues were only $350. And what they got to be my crew, they got their costume, they got their ride, the insurance, everything that normally comes with it.
Right.
But I rented a hotel. The first year it was the Four Point Sheraton. Then after that it was it's the Marriott now on the lakefront. It was the DoubleTree, which is beautiful. It's in Lakeway Center. And so I rented that. So they would come in the morning. They would go load the floats that day because Carrollton would move the floats to Clearview about 9 in the morning. My crew would go load their floats. And I learned after the first year with another cruise member stealing throws off of my floats, I learned to hire police to stay on the floats because my crew would go load them. After they loaded them, they would go to the hotel. I fed them before. Then I had buses bring them from the hotel to their floats. I had buses waiting at the end of the parade to take us back to the hotel. And then I had a pajama party after. And so I had like the bag of donuts, I had burgundy. I would have a big band and a big bash after, but it was just, my 200 members. It wasn't, an extravaganza stuff.
Superdome,
Because there's no, I've met with the owners of that hotel at Lakeway before and begged them to get rid of the retail space on the first floor and expand it and make it into a ballroom like the Landmark had. Because really the Landmark has the largest, and I don't know if they're even going to have that ballroom anymore because they're converting the hotel.
Yeah, they're converting it to senior living from what I saw.
So I don't even know what, if Jefferson Parish is going to even have that space available anymore. But I begged the owners and I told them, I said, look, I personally, even though I'm nobody and like I said, I barely have a pot to pan, I personally can book over $1 million worth of events in your hotel just by calling a few people right now. If you guarantee me you're going to expand that space. And they had the opportunity after Katrina to do that because the hotel had so much damage that they did have to do a lot of construction work and they chose not to. So there's the only other space in Jefferson Parish, or at least a reasonable location to the route, was the Hilton on Airline by the airport. So a couple of crews have done stuff there, but that's the whole premise. That they're really, some of the crews want to compete too much with New Orleans, and
yeah, it's honestly no competition though. As much as I love Jefferson, it's really not. It's a completely different feel.
The difference is, going back to what I said before, when the crews moved to Veterans Highway, every parade looked the same. Every parade looked the same. So it doesn't matter what night you go out there. You're going to see the same parade on Thursday as you're going to see on Sunday. The only exception was Caesar. Now, Caesar, Bob did a much better job with the costumes. He had the Columbos doing the maids, which the Columbos, oh my God, I mean, no one does it better. Let's face it, their collars are gorgeous and it's very well seen. But the other crews didn't put the money into that. They didn't have the revenue because they were like me. I should have been charging at least 500, but I didn't think people could afford it because I went after the family aspect. I wanted your whole family to ride, not just you.
Right.
So, and I mean, I had a couple of floats that were just like a whole family, one float. Um, Will Clark, oh my gosh, the baseball players and stuff he brought in, that's a whole nother thing. I had two floats that were just millionaires, absolute millionaires, and I took care of them like you wouldn't believe. But after Katrina, they didn't want to come back. The nation was putting New Orleans down,
Yeah.
and so they were scared to come back.
I hope you
But
squeezed more than 350 out of those guys.
well,
You won't say.
I got a couple of them on my board, and that kind of helps out.
There you
When
go.
when they saw the checks I had to write, I can say that Will Clark was very kind to Jason.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
will-
know that Will Clark. Prior to the show, you told me Will Clark was a king. He was a
He
grand
was my
marshal,
first grand marshal.
and from what it looked like in the Mardi Gras guides, it looked like he rode every year.
He
I'd
did.
remembered that he rode a few times, but it looked like every year he rode.
He rode
And
with me every year.
you'd mentioned that there was one of the floats where he rode as where it was Will Clark and friends, and as you mentioned, he
Right.
brought in a bunch of his friends. And one of the stories that you told me about, and I'd like you to kind of retell it here, was about a fundraiser golf tournament that he helped put together.
Well, I love Will. Okay, and I love his wife Lisa. They are the two most generous and loving people you will ever meet. Now, I think Nolan Ryan and a couple of other baseball players wouldn't agree with that because he was a very competitive baseball player, and that's what made him so successful. Will the Thrill,
Yeah,
like we spoke about, number 22.
yeah,
Um, he, let me just caveat and start with this. My very first year, I got my permit. Well, Jefferson Parish doesn't give you your permit until after you ride, really. But they tell you, okay, well, if you do this, 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 and this, you're gonna, we give you permission to ride. We'll give you a permit. So my very first year, I had less than 6 months to go from $0, four people, myself, my ex-husband, my ex-band director, and my dad. Okay, that's what I started Jason with. I had to go from that to 200 people and a rolling parade with all the bills paid in 6 months. And I did it. Okay, it was a lot of work, but I did it. So I had never met Will before. My treasurer for the very first year, it was a golf pro at Eastover. And Will Clark was one of his students. So he goes, look, I can get us a grand marshal. Don't worry about it. You won't have to pay him anything because he just likes to ride Mardi Gras. I'm like, okay. And so my deal was, oh, you're going to love this one. So my deal was I would give him a float, and I actually used Zeus's step float that they use for the junior maids. Okay.
uh-huh.
I rented that from Zeus. I will give you a float. I will pay for it. I will pay for the insurance. And I will give you 100 gross of beads to throw. You can put anybody you want on the float. All I ask is that you dress in black tie. And his wife, Lisa, she goes, I can ride with him? I said, absolutely. So he had one of his friends and his wife. I believe it was another minor league baseball player who is very wealthy and known in Louisiana. They own a lot of car dealerships in Baton Rouge. I forgot the name. I'm sorry. I'm old and I'm forgetting some things. Anyway, so it was him and his brother and their wives and Will and Lisa. Well, Wayne Lee, of course, Wayne Lee's the captain of Carrollton, and maybe I'm not supposed to say it because he's Mystic, but we're sitting there, the floats, we're in Clearview's parking lot. We're sitting there and we're loading the floats, and an 18-wheeler comes up to Will Clark's float. The back opens, a forklift comes out, and Will goes, I hope you don't mind, but I bought some beads to throw. Pallets of white pearls start coming out of the back of this 18-wheeler. And I'm sitting there talking to Wayne. I'm like, Wayne, how much does an axle cost? Because I didn't see how this float was going to move. He had so many beads on this float, they were over the top of the sides. Just bags of, as they had to be 14, either 12 or 14 millimeter pearls or bigger. I remember, when you get to the Bonneville Loop and the Severn Loop, but the Bonneville Loop, my float's here and I can see Will's float turning on. Well, first of all, it took 2 tractors to get his float to move. They had to push the float and just to get it to move out of Clearview's parking lot. So I'm sitting here going, oh my God, I can only imagine what the bill's going to be on this float, at the end of the parade. So, but we get to Bonneville and my float's on this side and Will's float's on that side. He's out of beads.
Out of beads.
Out of beads. Just waving at that point. So this man, I mean, he loved it. When we got off the floats, we got back to the hotel. I'm in the lobby and I'm dressed in my costume and everything still. And he comes up from behind me and grabs me and says, I had more fun riding tonight in Jason in your little parade than I do on my float in Orpheus. I'm resigning Orpheus and I want to do anything I can to help you with Jason. So not a week later, I was thinking maybe Will and Lisa would like to be king and queen. So I called up and I said, hey, Will, this is Melody. I said, look, I just want to talk to you for a second. It's just a thought I had. I would love for you to ride again with Jason, as long as you want. I'd like you to be king of Jason, the second king, and Lisa be queen. I said, but this one you got to pay for. It's not a free ride because of the cost with being a king.
Right. Yeah.
And I told him how much it would be, and it was a nice amount of money. And I can hear Lisa in the background saying, tell her we'll think about it and get back with her. The next morning, I opened my front door. Now, I live in Driftwood. They live in Old Metairie on Tokelon. I went to bring my son to school, and there's a note taped to my front door. It's an envelope. And I pulled it off and said, we'll do it. And there's a check for the full amount for them to be king. He was just so supportive of Jason, so supportive of what I was trying to do, of having a family crew, of having, fun things to do, because I was trying to make it like the old days where they had picnics and they had things where the kids were there, because that's what I remember, the fun part of being when I was a kid. So I got to be really good friends with Will and Lisa, and it got to the point where I didn't work for a while. I would drop Trey off at St. Edward's, and this is before Katrina, and Katrina was in the middle of all this. And then I would go to Will and Lisa's house on Tokelon. I had keys. So I would go to the house, I'd put coffee on and wait for Will and Lisa to wake up. And then Will would come down and we'd sit at the kitchen table and we'd talk about Jason and things we wanted to do. And Will would be sitting there autographing the sweet spots, for his company, because, they sell his autograph. And Lisa and I would go to lunch every day. So it got to the point where Will went and got gift certificates for us. And that's where we could go to lunch that day, because Will wanted to make sure we were going to eat at some place he had an investment. And so he owned part of Ruth's Chris. So we went to Ruth's Chris at least once every week. The stories, well, we had a nickname for Will, and Will likes Coors Light. So we used to call it entertainment by Coors Light, because you would get in his Suburban and you'd have to move the cans over. But so much fun. So he was in Arizona, I believe. And this was, the parade was in February. This was after he rode as king, before Katrina, so 2005. He calls me, said, look, he goes, I want to do a fundraiser for Jason. but I don't want you to work at it at all. I don't want you to be involved. You've got enough on your plate, but all the proceeds, we're going to divide the proceeds between autism, so an autism charity, because his son's autistic, and Jason, but Jason will get the lion's share. So be like 70-30. But I don't want you to do anything. Now, this is like 11:30, 12 o'clock at night that he called. So I'm like, okay. So I'm just like, all right, whatever. So I kind of I trusted them. Let's put it that way. I trusted them. Not only did we become friends, but we were becoming business partners in Jason, right? So he got back about 2 weeks later, and he's got a pad that he's working on and a pen. And I'm looking through this. He had all these celebrities. He was building a golf tournament at Eastover that was supposed to take place in August of 2005. And it was actually scheduled for the Friday after Katrina hit. Katrina hit what, on Sunday, Monday? And our tournament was supposed to take place on Friday. He had over maybe 40 teams of 4. And
Wow.
each team was paying almost $1,000. Okay. So this is one hell of a fundraiser.
Yeah.
He had given me a few checks to deposit the week before. Now, when they started asking us to evacuate for Katrina, I remember it was a newscast on the Friday before Katrina hit. And I was actually at a fundraiser for the Krewe of Sparta. And it was one of those $10,000 raffle events to where you pay $100 for the ticket, and then they pull the tickets down, and the last, 5 or last one gets a $10,000. So
Yeah.
I'm at Jefferson Orleans for that fundraiser. And so that afternoon I was at Will and Lisa's, and he gave me checks to deposit. And I didn't think of it, they were in my purse. So we evacuated on Saturday. I had reserved 8 hotel rooms in Houston. And my son was on a bowling league, so every Saturday morning we went bowling. So I offered some of those rooms to some of the people that we bowled with, but I called all my officers. And I said, look, if we want to stay together, because we don't know what's going to happen, if y'all want to come and stay with me, let's go to Houston and, y'all take these rooms. Well, it ended up to where only a few of my officers came with me. Will and Lisa went up to Will's ranch up in North Mississippi. Katrina hits. The Friday after Katrina hit, I was in the lobby of the hotel, and on the TV they did a fundraiser that John Goodman was narrating, and I think Wynton Marsalis was playing on it. And in fact, I grew up with Wynton. My major was music, and I used to play music with Wynton Marsalis when I was a kid. And I'm sitting in the lobby, and my purse is with me, and my ex-husband is sitting here, and some of my friends, and I just start crying. And they're like, what's wrong with you? I said, well, I opened up my wallet, and I pulled out a check from John and Annabelle Goodman for $1,000. I hadn't deposited it yet, but John Goodman was playing in my golf tournament. And here he is on TV raising money for New Orleans because of Katrina, and I was supposed to be having dinner with him that night.
Wow.
So, but anyway, so the golf tournament was supposed to take place that week. Obviously didn't, because they had people who had died and bodies were floating on Eastover's golf course.
Right.
Because I had friends who stayed here who were policemen, and who, while we were evacuated, we, had chats with them here and there, and they were just crying. I never heard these men cry like they had, because they were in the boats. They were fishing this stuff out. So anyway, so I get back to New Orleans, and, the parish started calling the captains in, because Mardi Gras was right around the corner. So they started calling us in, and Mr. Trapani. In fact, we couldn't go into the parish building on Elmwood because it had so much damage. So the parish owned some warehouses right there in the corner of Jefferson Highway and Clearview. It was an old paper factory or something. So that's where
Yeah.
we met. That's where the captains went and met. And we all voted to continue to have Mardi Gras. Because you've got to understand that even though Katrina hit us and it was right before Mardi Gras and everything, most of us had our dues in the bank for that Mardi Gras season.
Yeah.
So if we wouldn't have paraded, we would have had to refund all that money. But we spent the money. The money was already with the float builders. The money
Yeah.
was with costumers. In fact,
It needed to happen
it had happened, right,
regardless of the
for so many
finances,
reasons.
you know.
Right. So we all voted to have Mardi Gras still. And in fact, I got sued by a woman. She took me to court in Kenner, because that's where I live, but that's not where the Krewe was incorporated. It was in Jefferson Parish. But anyway, I had to spend $1,000 to defend myself on not being able to have the theme that I was going to have for my parade that year, because of course there was half of the floats were gone.
Yeah.
So
You had to take what you could get, really.
Right. So we had to be creative on our theme with whatever we got. So I won the lawsuit because the judge wrote in a Krewe and said, "Lady, you're nuts." But it took me $1,000 to defend that. And the thing was, is that the other captains told me, you can't lose that lawsuit, because if you have to refund money, if one crew had to refund money, all crews would have had to refund money.
Yeah.
So I was actually defending all the captains. Anyway,
That
so
seems pretty shaky grounds given the circumstance, really.
it was
I mean,
stupid.
come on, you know, that's similar to the girl right now suing because Gorilla Glue didn't tell her to put glue in her hair or not to put glue in her hair.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's that. I mean, that seems that frivolous to me. Like, oh, you didn't run with the right theme. I mean, well, how did it affect her?
Well, my theme was supposed to be, I could cry because Lisa's Wilcox's wife, we had put so much money into the theme. The theme was going to be the circle of life.
Mhm.
And we were having our masquerade gala at Metairie Country Club. And I don't know if you can see this. You're going to be you're the first people to see it.
Ooh,
This was
Wow.
our poster it was going to be, all of this was going to be in gold, in gold foil. And the poster was going to be in black, and it was going to be the circle of life. And I had this custom drawn just for this would have been our doubloon and our posters and everything that year. And all of our maids were different parts of the jungle, either the cats or the foliage or the water. I could cry because of all the plans we had. We couldn't do it. So
kind of a shame you weren't able to do that one. Jason over the years had some pretty doubloons and themes and all. They really
they really did.
they
It was
stood
very
out.
creative.
Like I know the early ones were designed by Hamilton Mint and Alvin Sharp, which was he's credited as being the guy that threw the handful at the captain of Rex to finally convince him to throw them. So as a doubloon collector, it was, you know, he has a special place. And the first one also noticed was designed by Oak One Heart, which is there a connection there to the family or?
I don't think so.
I-
I think it's whoever you knew that could
It's
draw. at the
very,
time.
yeah, it's very prominent on the 65 doubloon. It's undated actually, but I believe it's from the 65.
Mhm.
And it says Oak One Heart right on. I was like, wow, I've never seen that before. So
Yeah, they had the
Yeah.
games people play. They had the chess set. It
Mhm.
was really nice. They had um, something to do with Camelot. I've got all the old themes written down. The ones I remember is games people play, because when I was a little girl, one of the floats had to do hula hoops,
Mhm.
and it was the heaviest, fattest men in the crew. And for the ball, I had to show them how to do hula hoops. It was hilarious. My dad was on jacks, so I can remember my mom and dad making jacks to staple on the float. You know, it was, but anyway, so after we rolled in after Katrina, Will said we got to have this golf tournament. We've just got to have it. So he was able to. The first course that was redone that survived was Belterre out in La Place. So in the meantime, Will being Will, he doubled the amount of participants in the tournament. And there were so many people, and I'm talking about the coaches from LSU's football team, basketball team, baseball team, uh, some the pro athlete football players, pro baseball players, which came in, which we didn't publicize, some very well-known names. Um, Will's manager was one of the owners of the Diamondbacks, and so we had a lot of Diamondbacks. But then again, Will has so many friends, so
Right.
Yeah.
he he wouldn't let me work. I mean, that day he let me work. Okay, that day I got to go take tickets. That's all he let me do.
Hey,
He had
that's a good
Pat
job.
O'Brien's doing the bar. He had oh my gosh, was it Tasty or Dunkin' Donuts came out and actually did breakfast for everybody. Ruth's Chris did the lunch. I mean, it was top notch. But there were so many people playing that they had to get golf carts from every country club around there because they didn't have enough golf carts. And I, at some place, I have pictures where I got to Belterre and the parking lot was full of golf carts. Down the sidewalks were full of golf carts. Going this way is full of golf carts. I mean, he went above, beyond. In fact, that tournament, besides giving money to athletes for autism, that's what they ended up, that and the Chartwell School, um, paid for my parade the next year, my floats and costumes, just from
Wow.
that golf tournament.
Wow.
So, you know,
Wow.
and
Took a
he
little
told
weight
me,
off your shoulders that year, huh?
oh, it really helped. It really
Yeah.
did help because it was hard that those years after that. In fact, I paraded, my last parade was 2008.
Mhm.
And it was just because no one wanted to come, my millionaires and my folk, they didn't want to come back to this area. In fact, Will and Lisa moved to well, they moved to Prairieville, then they moved to Baton Rouge, and then they got involved in things up there because someone robbed their house on Tokelon. And if you've ever been in Will and Lisa's house, um, upstairs in the house was this one room that Will had all of his stuff in. And I'm talking about, I don't know why this keeps ringing. Um, you know, Will was on the Olympic team. Yeah, he played in the
Yeah.
Olympics. Will won the equivalent to the Heisman. Was it the
Mhm.
Golden Spike, the Golden Glove?
The
Golden Glove.
golden.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in this room up here, upstairs, it was a long, long, long wall, and he had a gun case made. So he had rifles in this gun case. I would say this cabinet was maybe 20 feet wide. And so all these guns were in the house. But he also had 11 addicts in the house. Jason had 5 of them. um, um, then there was a back bedroom up there, and he had a collection of like the old baseballs, you know, like the Mickey Mantles, the Babe
Yeah.
Ruth.
Yeah.
He had a lot of that stuff. He had that glove that was on as a pedestal. So of course, when Katrina hit me, because I even called them that Saturday morning and said, "Look, I've got hotel rooms. Do y'all want to come with me?" And I woke them up. They didn't even know people were being evacuated. I woke up and she goes, "No, no, no, we're going to go up to the ranch. We're going to go to the ranch." I said, "Okay, well, please keep in touch." And the land, well, I shouldn't tell that one, but they went to the ranch. We went to Houston, but someone tried to rob the house, and I believe they were taking those guns. And one of Will and Lisa's neighbors, from what I was told, Will, he was in the National Guard, ended up shooting the person, and Lisa just never wanted to go back.
Oh.
So from the ranch, there was another thing. Well, her dad was getting ready to pass away, and he was with them. So they went and bought a house in Prairieville that a builder was selling that was fully furnished. They wrote a check, bought the house, and like 2 days later, Lisa's daddy died in it. So that was basically after that. Their interest in Metairie and New Orleans diminished, you know,
Well, I
and
think we all saw quite the shift. People like, I think locals, especially wanting to ride more in the New Orleans parades. I felt like
yes,
Metairie really took a hit. I mean, especially even after, besides the crews that really had to scramble to put themselves back together, keeping the membership intact seemed very difficult. You
I
could see the size of the parades just
right.
dwindle.
I tried to pull it off as long as I could, but
Mhm.
Atlas went out. In fact, um, in 2008, my son was King Jason V. He was only 15. And my queen's daughter, my first queen's daughter, she was a teenager as well. She wore her mom's costume. Trey, because we costumes were really the big thing then, because Karen, it was all she got rid of a lot of her crews, and I was with Karen Massett, and she couldn't handle as many crews as she was doing. So she dropped me. She dropped a few of the crews because she took on Rex that year, and she kept Rex, she kept Carrollton, but she didn't keep me. So that very first year, I mean, I went to Diane. Diane did my crew. Actually, no, well, she did my crew and everything, but since Trey was my junior captain, he had that costume right there, which it's hard to see, but it's all rhinestones. It's heavy as hell. And I went and got him a crown, and he was my king, and Laura was my queen, and she wore, in fact, I don't know if you can see this picture. I don't know if, but
Yeah.
that's the very first year. Um, she ended up being the queen for the 5th year, and she wore that costume that her mother had. And that's Julie Jelenko. She was my first queen. She's the one who had called me, told me no matter what I do, she was going to be queen. She was very determined to be queen. And when she went to give up her crown at the 2nd year to give it to Lisa, she literally was fighting Lisa for the scepter. That's a whole nother story. But anyway, so Danny didn't have anybody. Danny was the captain of Atlas. He didn't have anybody to be king and queen that wanted to pay. So at that point, he was having trouble with the crew and everything. And Dorothea Halligan, who was now Mr. Trapani had retired by this time, and I think that was the year that Mike Yenny took over Trapani's spot, which I can tell you how that didn't work out. But so in a conversation, Danny was like, well, why don't you let them be king and queen for me too? So my son was the 37th king of Atlas at 15. His Laura was the 37th queen. They wrote on that Friday. Then the next Friday they wrote, actually we partnered because we didn't write by ourselves. We partnered and actually wrote as part of Napoleon. So we had floats in Napoleon as knights adjacent, and Trey and Laura went to Irvy's ball and was introduced as king and queen of Jason, and they wrote in Napoleon. So it was really kind of a strange year. But all the captains, we were all trying to keep it together. But Atlas didn't survive that. I mean, I think they're trying to get a permit now to come back. But
That's good.
Atlas didn't survive it. I didn't survive after a few years, and then Aquila. And the thing with Aquila, Adam said, as long as I ride one more year, the Melody. So he put floats on the road twice. Nobody on the floats.
Yeah, I remember a few of the later years of some of the parades, like you said, to where you would see empty floats.
Yeah.
You know, or a float where there would be like three people on a float.
Yeah. And I can tell you that there's still a couple of crews parading that were giving away rides. The captains were just giving them away. And then that's kind of what I understood was happening with Caesar, is that originally from a float lieutenant's perspective, that's how I know this, not directly from Bob. And I love Bob. I mean, Bob and I got along great. There was no friction or anything. I mean, it was great. He and I agreed on a lot of points. But his float lieutenants said that they were never allowed to give a costume away. And the only way you could ever be on a Caesar float was in full costume. And it was $500 for that costume. And if you didn't pay $500, you weren't getting a costume, you weren't on that float. So float lieutenants started to, the last few years, started to have costumes without people.
Hmm.
And so the minute that Caesar gave away that first costume, you knew their days were numbered.
Yeah.
And for Caesar to go down, you knew that the other crews had to be suffering because Caesar had such a following. But you got to look at it that I agree with you. After Katrina, everybody wanted to ride New Orleans.
Just
So
felt
what
that
with
way.
Metairie, and again, I blame it on a couple of things. One, the parish council, and I suggested this, and I constantly preach this whenever I'm asked, needs to get rid of every ordinance to do with a Mardi Gras parade except the ones that deal with safety and
Mhm.
start over. The
Yeah,
ordinances that
they've
we
gone a
had,
little nuts with you have to have this many marching crews and that many dance teams.
well,
It's expensive on crews, you know?
exactly. And the thing about that is that some of those ordinances were written in the 70s and 80s. Okay. So one ordinance, to give you an example, was a band had to have so many members playing instruments in uniform.
Mhm.
Then it had to have a total unit of how many of so many people. Well, after Katrina, there were only maybe two high schools in Metairie, and after the grade point thing, to where they had
Yeah.
a grade point average, that's what started killing the bands really.
Yeah.
Um,
My high school, I didn't get to march with the band until my senior year, and it wasn't because my grades were below average. It was that the grade point average thing, it knocked half of the band out to where they didn't have the 3.0 or whatever it was.
you got to understand, I was a band director. My degree's in music. I was a band director for two schools for, I hate to say it, John Curtis, and I worked for the Archdiocese of New Orleans at their Dominican. And I grew up in music, just like I did with the crews. Um, and when they put in when Jefferson Parish put in the grade point average thing, they knocked half of the kids out of the band.
Uh-huh.
Which where did those kids go? They went on the streets.
Yeah.
Okay, so these kids were no longer hanging around school with people that with adult chaperones and such. All of a sudden, they're on the street with nothing to do, and they're latchkey kids because their parents have to work. So what we did, and we went to school from 6:30 in the morning to 12:30, because Jefferson Parish was on platoon until my junior year in high school. That was the first time I went a whole day to school, is when they moved the girls into Bonneville. I was in that first group. But what else was there going to, what these kids were going to do? So I blame a lot of the problems we're having today is that we ran the kids away from school. We ran them
Yeah.
away from extracurricular activities. So with that being said, just that one ordinance saying the ban is this, and the parades and the crews have to follow it. Of course, they had to bring bands in from out of town. So what ended up happening? Instead of us making a donation to the school of $500 or $1,000, all of a sudden we're having to pay $3,000, $3,500
Yeah.
for
To
one
bus in
group,
a family
Yeah.
right? Because
or a
they had
band
to
They
pay,
rather.
need a place to
right?
stay and
They had to
everything
stay at a
else.
hotel. They had to feed them to where you couldn't put EJ in the parade. EJ had 10 kids.
Right.
When I was
Yeah.
at Bonneville, we had 140 in the band. After Katrina and after the grade point thing, you were lucky if you had 20 kids. So none of that met the ordinance. So what did that do? That ordinance, and I'm just using this one as an example, that ordinance applied to every single parade.
Yeah.
So some of these crews who were only charging 200, 250 for dues because they brought it down that low because that's what they had to do to get people on the floats, didn't have the money to pay all these bands. So what happens? The $200 dance team comes in.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, you've got all these little girls, all these people putting these dance teams together, and these little girls barely dressed. And I had a rule. I had to see the dance team before I put them in my parade. I didn't go for all that.
I'm not the
But
biggest fan of the dance teams, but some of them are entertaining, so I'll give 'em credit. But I'd much rather see a band. It's just it doesn't feel right to me.
So
A
what
band
is
in
the
a parade
difference?
feels right.
Right, so the difference between New Orleans and Jefferson Parish
Mhm.
is that New Orleans lets a parade be a parade. Doesn't matter how many kids are in the band, but New Orleans schools came back quicker. And I'm talking
Well, they
about,
also combined well. They did a good job of setting up the I forget what they call it, the Mac band or what Max band or whatever that
right,
was. That was like 3 or 4 schools put together, and they
exactly,
just made it happen. So
right.
uh,
And what did Jefferson Parish do? The
yeah, they
captains could not
regulated
pull
you.
from, and then Orleans saw what was going on. Now, I was friends with Ed Hampton. Do you know who Ed Hampton was?
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
first band director for the first 50 years of St. Aug.
Okay.
Oh,
So I called Ed. Ed, I'm the captain of a new crew in Jefferson Parish. I'm tired of not having Orleans bands in Jefferson Parish. Please, I'm going to pay you whatever I need to pay you. I want St. Aug to bring out my first parade. I want to have St. Aug out here. He goes, I can't do it. No matter how much you want to pay me, I can't do it. So I ended up getting Thurgood Marshall, and they came out and did a fabulous job. And they were behind my float, and the chaperones were bringing me drinks. I was handing them ice off my float. Got along great. And guess what happens? The very next day, crew of Thurgood Marshall, um, something to do with racism in Jefferson Parish. That the crowd was yelling racist remarks, that the chaperones weren't happy, and a Orleans band, a black band's not going to come back to Jefferson Parish. Well, come to
uh,
find out, because I'm like, wait, I didn't see that happen. I was right in front of them. They were playing. The chaperones were. I had a constantly ongoing dialogue with the chaperones.
right.
Come to find out, one chaperone went to the Times-Picayune and started this without any reason. It got so bad that it was in the paper for a few weeks. The principal at that school called me when he found out what happened, because they found out what happened first before I did. Because the police didn't even tell me. I mean, I got police all around me, right? As a captain,
Right.
they're rolling the parade with me. And come to find out, one chaperone just made some snide remarks. And when the school found out, they called and apologized to me. But after that, I couldn't get an Orleans Parish band to come out. And then it wasn't just me. The Orleans Parish schools created, I don't know, I hate to say a czar of the bands, but they had someone that was coordinating all of the Orleans Parish schools for a while. I don't know if they still do that or not. And they decided that they made a ruling that if there was a parade in New Orleans on the same night as the Jefferson Parish parade, the Orleans Parish school has to march in that parade. They can't go to another parish, whether it be St. Tammany, because even St. Tammany was trying to get, for like the original Orpheus, and they were trying to get some Orleans Parish schools.
Yeah.
Um, and as long as there was a parade in New Orleans that day, an Orleans Parish school could not parade out of the parish.
Well, at least they have St. Paul's and what's the other one out there, Fountain Blue, and they're fantastic. So when
I
they
had
come,
Yeah.
they're very
I
good.
had them. I had Fountain Blue. I think I had St. Paul's. I had North Shore. North Shore put on a great
Mhm.
show. Salmon, so I had to go out, and then guess what? I had to pay for their buses. I had to pay
Oh
for them
yeah.
to feed the kids that night. So
Oh,
again,
they didn't
my
travel light. Those
no,
those
and
those crews do not travel light. They're a
I had
huge bunch.
Laranger. I had Hammond. Um, I couldn't even get UNO, and that was my alma mater. And I UNO used
When I
to,
rode in Little Rascals, when this was years ago when they was still coming out of Lafayette Park,
Mhm.
they used to have a Saints player on every float. So we had oh man, Ricky Jackson was right next to me,
Oh yeah.
and he had paid for St. Aug to play behind us because he wanted to have them behind us. So I actually got to ride in front of St. Aug that one particular year.
And see,
And
I
that's
would
when
have,
there was still a ridiculous size band. Like
yeah,
they've actually scaled down over the years. It
it
feels
still
like
is
to me,
loud.
you know.
Being a musician and a past band director, trained in the musical arts, do you have a particular favorite
Oh,
band
yeah,
that you see in the
military,
parades?
military.
Yeah.
No, hard to argue
Uh,
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
my
they're
my
just so
favorite
precise.
my favorite band of all time, and I will do anything to see them, is the President's Own. Um, that is the Marine top band.
Yeah.
I knew some people in it. I went to college with a few people that were in it. I went to high school with a guy who was in it at 18. He was that good. Um, it's just clean, crisp, perfect. They don't make mistakes.
So have you
Um,
seen the Scouts? You
Yeah.
know what I'm talking about?
She is
oh,
definitely
it's
seen
drum
the
corps?
Madisons.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
yes. I'm a
Yeah,
Madison Scout fan.
Yeah.
Madison Scouts. They're fantastic.
1984, Georgia Tech. They did the Cats. They did
Mm.
Cats, and I dated the mellophone soloist. He did memory da 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 da, and in the middle of the field, the chorus going around him. One person played a mellophone, playing memory by himself. It was like, yes, goosebumps even thinking about it. He was cute too, but in fact, he's an instructor for Madison, or he did go back and his name was Kevin Snowden. He's a band director in Alabama. But oh yeah, uh,
We will laugh. They got us so good last year. Like
Yeah.
everybody knows that how crisp and clean they are, and like to hear them start
Crystal.
up is kind of a treat, So you could hear them starting the drum line off to get the timing and all that, and everybody
Yeah.
was putting up their instruments, and you were kind of counting it down in your head, and all of a sudden they were just like, "Hey!" and just like got in your face.
The
You were
wall,
like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
the wall of sound. It just hit you. Your hair
Oh
jumps
no,
up.
they didn't play. They didn't play. They just jumped to the side and started partying
Oh.
with everybody.
Yeah.
But everybody
Well,
got quiet and was waiting.
well,
They
like
got us
Lloyd
good.
and Joe, what they did to me, they were my. In fact, Joe's one of the ones that convinced me to start Jason. Right? Originally, he was supposed to be my co-captain, but he ended up not doing anything. So, but what he did do, my very first year, he said, "Okay, it's band director. All these guys are my friends, so I want to pay them money." So he went out and paid every single one of my bands $3,000.
Oh,
I had 10 bands.
Wow.
that
Yeah,
That's
250 a
that's
piece.
thirty
yeah.
That's
That's
thousand
100
dollars I had to
riders.
come up with. Right. So I'm like, why did y'all do that? You can't do that. You can't promise them, because at the end of the parade, I had to have my parade marshal out there with $3,000, because as they come off the route, they hand the band director the check.
right.
And I was like, $30,000? You couldn't have negotiated. Go tell Pinky we're doing Bonnable for 500. Um, so, but I ended up getting Bonnable after that. And Rommel, I mean, as captain, it's very hard to balance the books. I'm going to tell you that in Metairie. Orleans right now, oh my
Oh,
God,
they're
they
rich.
do no wrong. They can charge $1,000.
Mhm.
So in fact, okay, let me give you an example. I rode in the crew of Iris last year, and it was a dream of my mom and my mom was for me to ride in Iris one year, and I had never ridden in Iris before. And they always had a closed membership. You had to be nominated by somebody. You had to be voted in. And so
Right.
since the new captain, the granddaughter took over, she's opened up membership, and they're the largest crew. They
Yeah.
had 2,600 members last year. So we paraded bigger than Nick's and bigger than Muse's, but it wasn't really well known. She tried to make it known, but this captain is,
They're really doing good things with Iris. New floats are being built.
yeah,
That the look of it's getting different. They have new throws. They're
right.
doing good things with it. And we had one of our guests last year we both went to Alice Burney, and they had a big Mardi Gras ball there every year. And so we had started talking with her, and she was telling us about what changes the new captain had made.
Well,
And
that's
she
the
was loving it.
thing.
She's a float captain as well in
Well,
Iris.
because I rode
Lieutenant,
just as a
yeah.
crew member, and I joined and had to make a sizable deposit.
Mhm.
I had to buy. It wasn't a strict throws requirement, but you were looked down on if you didn't buy some throws, which I
Yeah.
did.
Right.
So to be a crew member, in Irish last year, and I'm not trying to put them down by any way, shape, or form. I kind of, first of all, a crew meeting, they can't have a full crew meeting anywhere because there's not a room big enough to fit the whole crew in.
Right. Yeah, it would have to be the convention center pretty much.
Right. So she had the crew meetings in the Landmark. Um, and it was great. You got in there and they had red beans and rice, so you actually could got something to eat. They had a bar and they sold stuff for the crew. Typical crew meeting, right? Um, but it's part the old women, and I hate and what I mean by old is old, OLE, not OLD. The older women that were in the crew when I was growing up, and up till the grandmother let go of the crew. It was a traditional crew. It was traditional Mardi Gras values. It was the costumes and the traditional ball and such. The new captain, it's the new wave. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
It's
And
the as much
it's the
money
way
as I
all
can
of them are
get.
going to be.
Right. And
Like
because
my dad rides
honestly,
in Carrollton, and it feels like they've maintained the traditional route, but a lot of
exactly,
them have
exactly.
made,
Right.
you know,
Right.
you could just
They're
tell the new kind of, I don't know, muses
right.
uh,
It's the new formula.
prototype, you know.
It's
Yeah.
it's we're only going to have riders. We're not going to have members.
Hmm.
They want riders. They build a new floats because she's got all this money. But it seems to me, and this is where one of my arguments was, if you have this many members, why do you charge that much money? Okay, so that was just my and only my opinion. These women do not mind spending all that money in the crew. They do not
Yeah.
mind. They ride on the floats as a sardine.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But and me, coming from being a captain and from riding Metairie where you have as much room as you want on a float, I of course overbought throws. And I was expecting the ride to be at least 2.5, 3 hours. We were off the floats in an hour and a half.
Yeah. It
And
is.
I'm like,
Lately, I can tell you last year, it felt like everybody was flying by. I was like,
yeah.
Jesus.
And
We
honestly,
had mentioned that several times,
we were
how
one of
quick
the
everybody was
last
moving.
we were one of the last crews that was able to ride before Latoya the destroyer came in and started breaking everything up.
Yeah.
Because
Oh
that
yeah,
night
because A-Rod
Yeah,
was a
that
lot.
night
someone
was
else
when
got hit.
Endymion, yeah,
Right.
when the Endymion accident
The,
happened.
yeah. So we were behind where the first one happened. We rode after, what was it, Nick's or Muse's?
Nick's was the
Next,
first
yeah.
one that had
Right.
a
So we were able to go, and then that night Endymion happened, and then after that, Bacchus had to break up all the floats that next night,
Yeah,
and
it's
then all,
yeah,
ridiculous.
and Toth.
yeah,
All
and Penny.
Yeah.
everybody, they had the train cars from Morpheus separated, and
Yeah,
the tail of the Baca Gator going down the street by itself,
I
to me,
know.
was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen.
They were moving the tail the other day to Oaks and the floats, or floats of the Oaks, sorry.
Mm.
And they showed on the news, there's the tail. And
Yeah.
you're like, if you really didn't know what you were looking at, you would go, what
Yeah,
the
what the
hell?
hell?
Yeah.
And it was a tail, alligator tail. But I felt sorry for Bacchus and I felt sorry for Endymion because that's a crowd thing.
It is.
It's a crowd thing. Um, and the crowds aren't the same either. So when
No, like
Yeah.
the past several years, I think in New Orleans, you always had Bacchus and Endymion that had the 10 people thick crowds. Well, almost every night's like that now. There is no real separation, I don't think,
but
anymore.
before Katrina, and I blame this on Katrina because our
Mhm.
demographic changed after
Yeah.
Katrina, right?
Mhm.
Because we had all these out of country people come in,
Yeah.
out of town people come in. Um, we didn't have people throwing stuff at the floats.
No,
Yeah.
I am happy to see people like, hey, man, you don't do that. Like the locals from way back still know the rules,
Right.
you know?
And then after, because I can tell you that I had people get hit in Metairie on my floats
Mhm.
because if they didn't like what was being thrown to them, they threw it back. Will Clark, here we go, Will's story. I had Will on a float with my boss. Okay. My boss, I worked for Weatherford International at the time. And my boss was this genius. His name was Jim Carosella. And Jim, we used to take bets on Jim how long it would take for anybody who talked to him, for how many minutes it would take for him to do actually explain his degrees. Okay. So he was an SCD, not a PhD, from MIT. Okay, so he had like he has a lot of patents in the oil field that everybody has to use. So you can
I
imagine.
deal with Weatherford constantly. I do oil field sort of design. So
Okay,
yeah,
well then you know
I'm very
exactly.
familiar with them.
Right. Well, he owned High Pressure Integrity and sold it to Weatherford. So I was actually hired for HPI. Within 2 weeks, I was working for Weatherford. But so Jim, when we merged with Weatherford, he became the vice president of R&D. He was in research and development because brilliant. So I convinced him. He was like, "Oh, you have a Carnival crew? I'll ride in it. How much is it? No problem. Here's a check. Dues. Oh, look, go shopping and get me my throws because I can't do it." So I took care of it, right? So I put him on the float, on Will's float next to Will. Okay, so Will, take care of him for me. It's my boss. I need my job. And this was after Katrina. This was the first ride after Katrina. So Will's on the float with him. They're going down veterans. Okay, Will can throw a baseball, right?
Yeah.
Pretty
You
good.
have to have some nerve to throw something back at Will.
So Will's on the float. The way he told this story when we got back to the after parade party was, "I saved his life." I'm like, "What do you mean you saved Jim's life?" He goes, "Well, I'm sitting on the float and I'm throwing, and I'm having a great time. And all of a sudden I see something coming at us or at Jim in my right eye. So I go like this and I catch it.
Ninja
And I saw the
style.
guy who threw it. And you know what I did? So can you imagine? And so the whole night was, "I saved Jim's life." I saved his life because I caught it, and threw it back at the guy. Can you imagine the poor guy on the ground that didn't know who was throwing that at him? And he
Right, yeah.
I was about
And
to
he
say,
didn't
that's
duck.
some
So
nerve to throw at
I
Will.
was like, "Oh my God, I'm going to have an insurance claim." But yeah, I mean, people after that Mardi Gras, it was like the demographic changed, especially around Lakeside, or on Severn. People were throwing things back at the crew. And I had members saying, I didn't, I had members that got hit, whether it was a beer can or beads or whatever. But I also noticed that in New Orleans, I rode in New Orleans after that. And people, it wasn't, the crowds were just not kind anymore. Um, I was really surprised by that because you would think that, okay, we're all having fun. But then look how many shootings now have happened at the parades. What muses, the shooting muses. There was, like every year something bad was happening. And you didn't see
We
a lot of
always
that
go to where the
before.
shooting happens the day after because nobody goes. You have like a whole block all to yourself.
Yeah.
It's great.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Crime tape.
So, I
And the
mean,
crime
it's-
tapes there.
So it's not only the crews that have changed, it's
Yeah.
the whole, the scope of it. But you're right. Metairie is barely existing. I don't know how it's still existing. Another thing I didn't like, and I was, as you
Well, we
can
are
tell,
seeing some growth too. So Centurions has expanded their parade and is starting to build up a lot and really put together a good parade. And then there's the new one,
Mad Hatters was
that
really cool.
put together a real
And
nice parade.
I hope they're
Uh,
successful. I really do.
We
I
did too.
really
They
do.
came on and they actually showed us the drawings of the floats before the parade. And I was shocked that they were actually building a parade from the ground up, floats and all, for the first ride. I was like, wow, that's
They have a different formula.
very ambitious.
So they were showing you things like this.
Yeah.
My
It was
float
his,
stick.
I believe his daughter was the artist, if I remember correctly. But his daughter was really doing some beautiful work.
Yeah,
I caught a pass from Bobby Hebert that night.
Oh Lord.
He was the
They have
Mad
a different
Hatter.
They have a different formula, and it's a lot of business people that are bringing
is,
their business
you know.
people in. And
I thought they did
I
it
hope it works.
tastefully. They did it tastefully. I was kind of worried that it would look like a rolling billboard, but it didn't.
Well, you see,
I thought it was done well.
More
what
ordinances-
was drawn actually looked
More
like.
ordinance in Jefferson Parish says it can't be a commercial parade, but
Right.
ours has been
Yeah.
commercial from the very beginning. So if they were able to get the Jefferson Parish Council to put that aside and let them have a corporate parade, which I think Mad Hatters is an example of
Yeah.
coming from court, then all more power to them, because that was the next step that a lot of the crews wanted to take, because we found out that we could not exist on membership alone. There had to be a fundraising element, and
Yeah.
either you were actually like Atlas and Excalibur. I don't know if, I guess they're still doing it. If you weren't married to the bingo every week,
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, all the crews do. You know,
And-
Bing and the Lions,
right?
you know, I know that there's you know, like when my club's bingo finishes up, or like when we take over, you know, the previous group is, you know, one of the parading crews.
Right. Well, see, Diane wanted me to take over one of her bingos. This is years ago. And I just couldn't see myself married every week to a bingo hall. And I
Yeah.
feel sorry for the crews that do it. And especially because when you read the ordinances regarding the proceeds that you make from a bingo, it can only be spent on 2 or 3 things. That's it.
Right.
I believe it's not even costumes. I think it's floats, insurance. But I've been away from it for a few years, so it made more sense to me because of the people I had involved, the Will Clarks and the Lisa Clarks and the Silers and stuff. The people I had involved like to do more fundraisers. So we
Yeah.
had a masquerade gala, and then we had an auction in the middle of it where Will donated batting lessons and pitching lessons and a bed made out of bats. You know, we had all kinds of different things like that. Well, we made $30,000 just off of the 8 things that Will donated to the masquerade gala.
Well, you
Right.
can pay your bands now.
Right, thank you. You know, we found that so this is why I didn't marry Jason to the bingo. Now, maybe if I would have, we would have gone a few more years.
Yeah,
But I was
you know, if
raised
it's
in
not
the sun
fun,
and-
it's not worth doing, in my opinion. Even though I hate to see a parade, you know,
Well,
have
it was
to
a risk too,
have
because
to
there
go
were some
away,
nights that Diane had actually come up with all the money because the bingo didn't make enough money to pay for itself.
Right. Yeah.
And I didn't want to be in that spot. So, and at the time I was pretty well connected with a lot of nonprofits. So I saw I was involved in volunteering in fundraisers that were profitable. And that's where I took Jason. I took Jason into doing, like, we did a Bonko night. It was $25 to get in. I had 100 people there. Okay, we played Bonko. Will liked when he played, you know, one of the things in Bonko, I don't know if you ever played it, but when someone gets a Bonko, they can throw something around the room. So we threw a Koji, which was my mascot, my 20-inch purple, green, and gold friendly dragon. And so when someone would get a Bonko, they would throw the Koji. Well, Will had to get Bonkos because he loved throwing things, right? But instead of giving money, we gave prizes. So I was able to have, because we were nonprofit, I got the prizes donated. We had it at the Lions Home, where most of the crew, a lot of crews had their crew meetings, because Wayne Lee, he was my partner with my floats and everything, and he
Yeah,
ran the
over at
Lions
Metairie.
Home. Right, so I had everything there. So we did a spaghetti dinner, and for $25, you got a spaghetti dinner and you got to play Bonko, and then you could win prizes. Well, I made $2,500 off of one night. So why should I do 10 weeks of bingo to get $2,500
Yeah.
when I could do it one night with that? So we
I
had
know
a
my dad
spaghetti
had been
dinner.
hosting a lot of the bingos. I don't know where, but for Carrollton, but I believe they do that more as a donation. They just go help them out. But yeah,
Well, you got to
the-
understand Carrollton's expenses are less too.
well, plus
don't-
they're renting out their floats, you know,
Right,
so
they don't have to pay for floats.
theirs are
Yeah.
actually their dues are still pretty reasonable. And
Was there about
I've-
5 or 7, somewhere in there?
I think with like throws is in the 7 range. Of course, you need more. So that's not all
Yeah,
you're
that's
getting.
just
Right.
the
That's your
crew
base
required
package,
throw,
you
shall we
know.
call
Well,
them?
my Iris ride that lasted an hour and a half cost me $2,600.
Wow.
That's great. It actually takes longer than that for that parade to ride by you. For you to
Yeah.
make the whole route, it seems amazing to me because that
Yeah. So I
basically
didn't go
means that
back.
you had to stretch the whole route, you know.
So I've moved to Slidell and they have crews up here. So my intention is to join a crew up here. I wanted to join Poseidon. The
That's a
crew
great
Yeah,
crew.
here.
they're a great crew. We had them on last season, and yeah, they were awesome.
They
Yeah,
use
they
a mix
blew
of
that
Milton
parade up,
Cannons
and it's a
floats
nice
and other
parade.
floats. So they're big floats. They're a nice crew. They're like 900 members, and they only charge $250.
And they're really
Yeah.
bringing in a lot of good bands and everything too.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the more fun dance crews.
They had the
Got-
610 Stompers,
Yeah,
which I love. I
yeah,
love the idea. And they, like you said, they had the better bands, and
yeah.
they're doing it without robbing their members. You know, when you get these big crews and they got 2,000 people in them, and everybody spend $1,000 on dues and maybe a little throw package, and you got there were 60 something people on my float.
Phew,
Okay,
jeez.
one float.
yeah,
Okay, and you know, why do you need that much money? I mean, the Orleans Parish bands are not getting that kind of money. They have a
They're high.
scale. They get either
I know
1,500
what
or like 2,000.
I know what Carrollton paid last year, and it was substantial just
Right,
for their
because Carrollton
bands.
has that many bands.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
okay, you're talking about an income. You're talking about, let's say you have 35 floats. Okay, a float in New Orleans could be a tandem of
Right.
3 floats, and you've got $1 million coming off every one of those floats.
Mhm.
Or let's say even 500,000.
Yeah.
Okay, those bands didn't cost you $2 million.
Oh no,
$3 million.
no.
no,
Okay, to
I
build
say
a float,
substantial because I'm poor.
right,
Like, but it's a big number there,
right.
you know.
You know, so I just don't understand. Now, the captain of Nick's got what? The news says that she got her hand caught in a kitty, and she's got
Yeah, I
some
saw
things
that
pending
today.
against her. Besides of her cruise quitting, which I don't disagree with what she posted. I didn't see the harm, but someone in a crew did, and it only takes one person to roll that ball, and then it just like
It felt
snowballs
like it was
downhill.
it felt like it was something that was to me, outside perspective, it felt like it was an excuse for a lot of them to
Yeah, I think
start
so.
their own crews.
Right.
And
well, it
And
seemed like
I
there was a
don't get
lot
into
of
the
people
politics, but
that were already, I
disgruntled.
guess, disgruntled with her,
mm,
and then that was the final straw that broke the camel's back for him.
Yeah.
it was so quick that all of a sudden there was like 3 new crews.
Yeah,
I was like,
Oh,
wow,
yeah.
that almost felt like that was planned. But
And you see, to Metairee's detriment, New Orleans doesn't turn away a crew.
Mhm.
So, you know,
they're
why?
actually capped now, but all they're doing is tagging on to the end of another parade that isn't maxed out yet.
yeah,
Exactly. And I mean, I know that Nick's has a sister crew in Metairie,
Pandora.
which kills me because I went to the captain of Muses
Mhm.
before years ago and said, can I have your waiting list? We'll do Muses of Jefferson. I said, you already know I know how to put a crew together. I don't need to be a captain. I'd like to just be an officer, you know, and let's do that. And they said, no, we don't want to do that. Next thing I know, Tootie got it. They gave Tootie, Cleopatra, their waiting
yeah,
list. Now,
Oh.
Tootie's passed. I love Tootie to death.
right.
Mhm.
But the reason being is that she had an Orleans route, or part of her route went into New Orleans.
Yeah.
So, and then the night they rode, they were able to get, you know, Tootie had some floats she already owned, you know, and then Tootie had other contracts. So it made it work as far as physically, you know, the logistics of it. But I was like, damn, you know, and then the next thing I know, oh, Nick has this crew in
Pandora.
Metairie. And by that time,
Yeah.
you know what? You get to be old like me. You know how much work it takes. You
Yeah.
don't want to do the work anymore.
Well,
You know.
let me ask you this: how would you predict that uh, the current times we're in with, the COVID pandemic. Do you think that it's going to have
Yeah,
any
we should be
kind of
watching Knicks right now.
impact
as a matter of
on,
fact.
I mean, obviously this year kind of got, changed to where, we're having the crew of house
Ruined.
floats. We've got, the floats in the Oaks. We've had a couple crews that I've seen doing a stationary parade per se.
Dionysus.
Yeah, they just did one this past weekend.
Right. Well, you know what I think? First of all, you got to remember that before, you know, the mayor canceled Mardi Gras, the crews form right after the last ride, right?
Right.
So they start collecting their dues and getting their deposits for the membership. So by the summer, the crews right now, at least as far as I know, not so much the Metairie, but the Orleans crews, by the summer they have deposits, or even by September, they got most of their dues in the bank already. Or they, if not most of it, they have a good part of it. Like with Iris, half of our dues were 600 just for the dues, I think, or 800. It was one of that. And between the deposits and everything, we had to put in June. So if our dues weren't fully paid by August, we weren't riding. So I mean,
Right.
they do a big push. You're not going to get your position if you don't pay. So you got to fight
Yeah,
that a little bit. But
I mean, we
everybody
all
pays
paid
their
our
dues.
dues too, but it seemed like there was no way in the world we were ever going to ride this
Right.
year. So I was like,
But
whatever.
Latoya, the Destroyer, didn't close everything until what, about a month ago?
Yeah,
2 months ago at the most?
it wasn't long after. And really, she didn't officially make the statement. She was
Right.
kind of pushing all the crews to do it. But a lot of the crews were like, well, hell, we're going to parade if y'all not going to tell us we can't.
So financially, they already have the money in the bank for this year.
Mhm.
Right.
Well, they had
Right.
to. There's still a lot
Okay.
of expenses, whether you parade or
And-
not.
Right, but they're not paying the majority of their expenses. They're
Yeah.
not buying their costumes. They're not
No,
paying the
right.
float rental. They're if they own the floats, they're not paying the artists to redo the floats. They're not being whited out and all that. Maybe they are, and they're sitting in a den, right?
I think a lot
So
of them
the
actually
first thing
were
going
just
for
because it
them
kept
is
going.
that these people had paid their dues, so they already got their crews in line.
Mhm.
But you know what's going to happen? I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to be like after Katrina. I think all these people want something to do so bad. And I think it's even more now because everybody's locked up in their house. They can't go shopping like they normally do. They can't walk down the street without a mask on, because of all of these, the quarantine and everything. I think what's going to happen, they're going to do great next year and even better. Now, whether that holds up for 2 or 3 years after, that's to be seen.
Yeah.
But I think 22 is going to be a carnival like you haven't seen before, if it gets to roll. Because-
Yeah.
I kind of predicted rolling. I expect the crews to be more lavish than ever, but also kind of expect the crowds to be somewhat thinned.
And the other
it'd
thing
still
is,
be
too,
substantial, but I think it'll be thinned out.
the other thing is too, excuse me, the Dan Kellys, the plush appeals, the bead dealers. Okay,
Right.
they didn't get to sell everything. Okay,
Oh no, there's warehouses.
Yeah.
right. So they go to China in March and April every year. They go and they do their contracts and they order their throw beads, and then they bring orders from the crews for the custom stuff, right? So not only do you have custom stuff that's just being held, now maybe that gets distributed in other ways because probably a lot of it's dated and so forth, right? But they've got the throw beads, all of the paraphernalia, the stuffed animals, and because Plush Appeal at one time, I don't know, they may still do this, but they were the largest importer from China of stuffed animals because they brought the skins in and then they filled the skins here because they provide stuffed animals to Disney World, to Six Flags. So the bead business, when they first got into it, it was just a side business. And now it grew, it's big. Because I was one of the, let's put it this way, I brought Jason to Plush Appeal my first year because of the discounts they gave us. okay, because they were trying to get in with all the crews. And I think there was only like maybe 5 or 6 crews my first year that actually went to Plush Appeal. And then now look at it. I mean, they got
Yes.
Iris, they got all the big crews because they did the right thing. And they own that whole corner. They own all those warehouses, and they let the crews use them if they need it. And so it's a good thing. They did the right thing. Because I knew the two people, the husband and wife who started, and now the daughter's running it. But they're stuck. Okay, so I feel sorry for them because I don't know how much more they can order for next year to actually have the income that they normally have,
Well, I
right?
wonder how much they have to order yearly to maintain their discount. So what are they stuck with? Twice the product they need, you know?
Right,
And
because
they're gonna
those
have to sit
warehouses
on it.
are, right, you got to understand there's only one train,
Mhm.
Yeah.
one train that comes from California once a week. And all the throws are shipped to California, unless it's changed since I was a captain.
Yeah.
But they're shipped to California in the big train cars, and once a week those trains come into New Orleans. After Katrina, we had a problem getting throws because we couldn't get the train cars in from California. Okay, so only what comes in on that train, unless, like I said, unless they have different logistics now, different shipping, there's only so much that can come in every week. And so they have to do it over a period of time. So anything that came in, let's say that their generic throws started coming in July or August, that's in their warehouse now.
Oh, that's
Right,
yeah.
yeah,
And it
yeah.
I
takes
have
a
a,
week.
I saw a video of a warehouse and it was like, oh, look at this.
I mean,
it
look at
was
all the
stacked
buildings
floor to
that
ceiling.
Beach by the Dozen has, that Dan
Yeah.
Kelly has out there. How
They're
many
Yeah.
floor to
buildings
ceiling.
full? Okay, so his biggest customers are Endymion, Bacchus, and then some of the smaller crews, right? But mostly Endymion. I mean, that's his bread and butter. Endymion
Right.
can do anything. You know, I was surprised, and I guess again, Latoya the Destroyer. You know, the extravaganza is not an Endymion function.
Oh,
It's
It's
Ed Kelly. I mean, Ed Munez, Dan Kelly production.
hmm,
It's a for-profit venture.
yeah.
So, at least that's what I know from my days. And I knew Ed Munez, and I came home one day to find Ed Munez pounding of Ed Munez for mayor sign in my front yard. Because and I lived on Driftwood Boulevard. He's like, "Oh, Melody, you know, captains have to hang in there with other captains." Um, but I respect him a lot. I do, and he did a lot for. I mean, Bacchus and Endymion. I mean, they
Yeah. I
defined
mean,
the big
they
group.
rewrote Mardi Gras,
Mardi Gras.
really.
Right. So I respect them a lot, and I think of them very fondly. In one way, in another way, the model killed Metairie, was part of the problem with Metairie, because Metairie didn't have the logistics. Again, the crews in Metairie didn't have a place to go to at the end of the parade that their floats could ride through, and they could have a big party. And I can tell you that I had gentlemen in my crew, a gentleman in my crew. I guess I'm not going to get in trouble for all this stuff I'm telling you, will I?
oh,
No,
we're
I mean,
alerting the press in the morning. So
Uh, I mean, my stuff's old, but I had a gentleman in my crew who I respected very much, who brought in some members, and his wife and his daughters were maids for me one year. Um, Came up to me and said, if I don't own 51% of Jason the day after the parade, I'm pulling everybody out because he thought I'm going to make this into Endymion. And he wanted to make it a for-profit. He offered, I was still going to run the crew. This was the offer I was given. Okay, now I'm the captain of the crew. I formed the crew. I've got the charter. I'm the one who's
right.
registered with the state of Louisiana, me. And he's telling me, he goes, yeah, I have to own 51% of it. And I'm going to pay you a salary. You'll work for me. I'm going to pay you a salary and you'll be captain and run the crew. But I'm going to own it. And I'm going to put all these people in it. And I'm going to get this route to where somehow it goes to the Pontchartrain Center so we can have something. Or I'm going to talk to somebody about building something at the end of Veterans or somewhere in that area that's going to be a reception hall or something else that we'll be able to bring the floats into. And I guess you know what my answer was.
Yeah.
Not just no. Hell no. So I could, and I lost some members over that because they couldn't understand why I didn't want to be a super crew. My whole thing
You probably
was
saw it as a not a realistic goal, I'm sure, you know.
it turns the crew into riders instead of members.
Mhm.
And that's what you have in New Orleans. These people don't, they'll go to a crew meeting, they'll buy a ticket to anything that sells alcohol. So if it's a ball, a supper dance, or whatever they have, a gala, okay, they'll go to that. But there's no more of the picnics, the going out and doing things with the families. Jason used to have two pickup trucks. These two guys had pickup trucks. One pickup truck was full of ice, and the other one was full of beer and and soft drinks. And we would go out to Metairie Playground and play baseball. We did things, and that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to bring back the family aspect, the having fun. And my goal was 400 members. And my last year riding with the full parade, I had 400 members.
Well, you
I
know,
was in line.
Yeah.
accomplish your goal.
Yeah, and I was in line to, honestly, Caesar had more than Caesar had about 500 members in their heyday. But at that time they were about 400 members, and I was in line to be the next largest crew. And then Katrina hit. So when Katrina hit, it changed. I mean, it changed a lot of us. But I had a different aspiration for what I was trying to do, and I had some people who couldn't understand that, and that's where I started really realizing, hello, Melody, wake up, that these people are not Mardi Gras people. They don't understand what Mardi Gras meant to us growing up in the cruise and back in
Yeah.
the 60s and 70s. They just want to party. And that's where we are today. In my opinion, there's not every crew is like that. There's still some crews that, everybody's friends and they talk to each other outside of the crew meetings. They go have dinner, or their families do things, and their kids are friends, and
Mhm.
and then the kids start getting in the cruise and the kids carry on, because I'm a kid of Mardi Gras, and I'm not an exception. And I don't believe I was, because there were a lot of people I could have a conversation with and would know exactly where I was coming from and what I was talking about, because their parents were in the cruise and they grew up in the cruise just like me.
I'd say
But
there's
I
probably,
just,
I don't know, dozen, maybe Baker's dozen of them that still maintain that sort of feel of a family aspect
right.
between Metairie and New Orleans, but it's they're a dying breed. And I'm not saying that the parades are going away, but they're a small
It's almost
sample
it's
of.
like a spring break attitude's coming in.
Yeah,
Well, there's paraders, and then there's Mardi Gras.
this is my Mike Yenny story. I moved, like I told you before, that my crew would load the floats and go to the hotel. We'd spend the day in the hotel partying, having lunch. I'd feed them all. I never bought alcohol. They always had to buy their own alcohol. I had one year, and was it this year? It was that year. It was the year after Katrina. It was 2006 when we rode, and I think that's when Mike Yenny was over Mardi Gras. I get a call. The first thing that happened that day, I get a call from General Honore. You know who he is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he travels. I'm sorry, this is very heavy. That was my
Yeah.
captain's
Ah.
badge. Um, he was traveling. I mean, he was the savior of New Orleans after Katrina. I get a phone call from his staff saying, General Honore has a rock band that travels with him, and they need something to do. And we heard you have a parade and you have a party. Can we send that band over to play for your party? Yeah, how much? Oh, free. Absolutely free. Well, being the musician that I am,
Yeah.
nuts about military music, oh my God, who do I have to sleep with to get them to play?
Yeah.
All right. So I said, you know what? I'm going to do even better. I'm going to give them a float to ride on and put them in the parade. And I'm going to give them some throws. So I went and took a collection of throws from the crew, and we gave them throws, and we put the band on, and the band played for the party. So I have Louisiana coaches I rented, which is a good chunk of money to bring
Yeah.
my crew to the float. I also had made a deal there was a guy who at the time was renting, the old warehouse
Yeah.
downtown on
Mhm.
Chapatulas.
Uh-huh.
Well, there was a club in there, and the guy who owned the club, I don't remember the name of the club, owned some Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and he owned his show cars. And I had gotten a call from them saying, "Hey, would you like these show cars to be in your parade? How much?" "Oh, free. They just want exposure. All we want to do is put the name of the club on the side of them." "You got it, baby. Give me a Ferrari." So my son, who was 14 at the time, was like, "Mom, from the hotel to the parade, can I ride in one of the cars?" "Go ask the gentleman if you can ride in the car." And the guy goes, "Yeah, come on, get in the Ferrari." So may my son's dream come true, right?
Yeah.
So he gets a ride in a Ferrari instead of a bus. We are on the bus. Now I've got Will. Will's not in costume. Well, he's in, no, he will like to go as himself if he wasn't king. So I'm on the float with Will, my officers. I mean, not the float, excuse me, I'm in the bus, right? We are just pulling out of the parking lot from the hotel. Mike Yenny, now my bodyguard was a Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office. He was a lieutenant. And God bless him. I made him wear, I had radios that I had a radio with all my parade marshals. And then so he had to carry that. It was a Motorola radio. So under his tails, he had a Motorola radio hanging down. He had a sheriff's office radio because that's how I talked to my police escorts was through that one. And then of course he had his gun and everything else. So
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
every year he was like, by the end of the parade, he had to carry on. Plus, he had to open all my beads for me because the captain doesn't bend over.
Yeah.
You know, and so he would load my arm, and then me being the thrower that I am, a dozen goes at a time, 2 dozen. I'll take more, please. So he used to hate me.
You're giving them a
All right,
workout.
right. So we're pulling out of the hotel. I've got my crew on the floats. No one's got a car, right? No one has a car. He's like, "You're not rolling, I'm pulling your permit." What the? And I used the bad word. He's going, "You don't have enough fire extinguishers on your floats." Now, my floats had been in the parking lot since 9 that morning. I was out there when the crew started to load the floats. So everything, and the fire department was out there. So the inspection on my floats was done that morning. If we didn't have enough fire extinguishers, then my parade marshals, who were officers in Carrollton, because my floats came from Carrollton, they would have taken care of that during the day. They would
Right.
have brought it to me. I would have never been a concern because I rented my floats. So they're responsible for giving me a float with everything I need. So we get to Clearview's parking lot. I'm 5'2". Okay. I'm a short little blonde haired woman. Will Clark is 6 something. Mike Yenny is like 6 foot. I had a couple other members are all 6 foot. I got the fire marshal there, 6 foot or taller. I get in the middle. There's a circle of men, and there's me in the middle. So my bodyguard, my deputy, whispers in my ear, "Do you want me to take care of this?" I said, "Can you please? I don't know what to do," because Mike's sitting there screaming at me, and Will's screaming at Mike, my ex-husband screaming at them, and I'm in the middle of all this chaos, and I got a crew getting on the floats, and we're getting ready to roll. My deputy, because that's his nickname after this. That's Mike Yenny called him my deputy after this. Said, "Okay." He goes, because he was over narcotics. So his team of narcotics were working plain clothes for the parade, and they were there in Clearview's parking lot. Next thing I hear is, and these sirens and everything going off. He goes code 3, which is a big alert saying, "Come now," or I don't think it's officer down, but it's really close to that.
Yeah.
Right.
On Veterans Boulevard with these undercover vehicles, my parade marshal's in the first one. And you might even know my parade marshal, but I don't remember his name. I'm so sorry. But they get to Lowe's. And before the police pull up on the sidewalk at the entrance to Lowe's with all these cars. They run in, they grab every fire extinguisher off the shelf. They make a count of it. They throw them in the police cars. My parade marshal is trying to write the check, and the police are already leaving with them. So they get back to the parking lot, and my deputy brings out one of the fire extinguishers and goes up to Mike Yenny right in his face and says, "Are we good now?" And Mike was like, "Yeah, you're good." So after that, all I heard at the next, because Mike was only head of it for a very short time. After that, anytime I saw Mike, he goes, "And how's your deputy?" Because he scared the shit out of him.
Yeah.
John and his team scared the shit. In fact, they got in trouble for going code 3 down Veterans Boulevard.
Well, hey,
But
it's for Mardi
Mike
Gras.
did-
That is an emergency. I mean,
Well, the thing is, what
That
you got to
works for me.
consider is anything happens to a captain, a parade might not roll.
Yeah.
And the reason why I called my attendant a bodyguard was because the very first year before I rolled, when Mr. Trapani when Harry Lee gave me my permit, the parish council gave me my permit. When Mr. Trapani sat me down and said, "Okay, where do you want to roll? What day do you want to roll?" I said, "Wherever you want to put me." I was very cooperative, let's put it that way. I didn't argue with anybody. Whenever the parish council called me and said, "Okay, you need to come to this meeting and tell us what you're doing for this." I was very agreeable. I was the youngest. I was the captain that kind of sat there in the corner and watched what everybody else was doing before I made a decision as to what I wanted to do. I was learning from the best, right? I'm learning from the people who've been putting in Mardi Gras all these years. So, Mr. Trapani sat me down and said, "Okay, well, I think what I want to do is the crew of Aquila." Because I didn't want to go the first weekend because Excalibur had just agreed to go after Atlas. This was 1 year after Excalibur started. So Excalibur's going after Atlas. Caesar, no one wants to ride on Caesar because Caesar is Caesar, right? And I didn't want to ride on Monday. That was Sunday. That was Centaurians. And at the time, either Tuesday or Wednesday was Thor. I didn't want to go in the middle of the week. So he goes, "All right." He goes, "I'm going to put you behind Aquila." Okay. So unknown to me, Adam Main, the captain of Aquila, went to Jefferson Parish Council and said, "I don't want anybody behind me. This is my night, yada, yada, yada." And he goes, "Well, I'm going to flatten her tires. I'm going to put vehicles. So after I come out of Clearview, I'm going to have people put vehicles on the street so she can't roll behind me." He started making threats. And he made a threat then in front of the parish council. He was going to do something to me. When that happened, I got a phone call from Frank Graff, who was Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office. And I guess he was one of the coordinators of the details and stuff at the time. He called me and he told me what happened. And he said, "We would feel better because, he goes, "Well, who do you have riding with you on your float?" I said, "Well, really just me." And I think the first year was me and my son. I rented one of Mac's little floats. He goes, "We would feel better if you had a bodyguard or somebody with you in case an arrest has to be made." They were thinking that Adam was going to carry through on something and they would have to go arrest Adam. And he said, "Do you know any police officers?" And I said, "Yeah, I do. My son bowls with the police officer's daughter on Saturday mornings. I can go ask him." Unbeknownst to me, well, I kind of knew he was involved in Mardi Gras. I didn't know he was a float lieutenant in Caesar. So when I asked him if he would ride with me, I think in my purse I have a picture of it, but he ended up being my attendant. And I felt so sorry for him after all this time because he carried so much. My second year, I had this hat they called the pimp hat because it was so big. And he was bald headed. And every time I bent over to get beads, it cut his head. So I was told I couldn't have a hat anymore. So, but yeah, you never know. At that time, it was very competitive. I'm sure it's still competitive, but they don't have the United Carnival Captains Club anymore in Jefferson Parish. So I don't know if they have a group where they're meeting and discussing and
It,
helping
it
each
feels
other.
like it feels like that is the case if they're kind of getting together again. I don't know if
Good.
it's like an official capacity, but it does feel like at least the Metairie crews are really working together um, to come up with their themes because everybody's renting floats and whatnot. So there is,
And also for the
I
first
think, a lot of
time last year, Jefferson Parish all of a sudden was given money to the crews, and all of a
what?
sudden, Matt Cantrell had a crew again.
Yeah.
What they were given, they gave each crew 10,000, and then they
Well,
gave
they had come
25.
out what the year before? What was that?
Yeah, Kings came out
Kings,
the
yeah.
year prior,
Yeah, it's just
and
2
then
years ago.
what was it? Zeus that ran after him, or Atlas?
I'm not
Who
sure.
was
Well,
it that ran after him?
Don't
Atlas
recall.
hasn't ridden. I think Atlas tried to get a permit for this year, or did they get one for last year and actually rode?
Yeah, I think it was Atlas last year that rolled
Okay,
right
Maybe
after him.
so.
so
The
I
Kings,
was like, I
that
would have
first
loved
ride, they rode.
10,000.
Yeah.
I would have loved an infusion of cash, but that was never offered to us. So I applaud them. I applaud the parish council for opening up the checkbook. I hope that this parish council realizes that Mardi Gras is an economic engine for Jefferson Parish.
Yeah.
And with all of these ordinances, and what killed me was that when the last two, maybe three parish presidents um, and the council people just kept putting on more regulations. You have to have prettier costumes. You have to have more bands. You have to have better floats. But the thing was they're telling the captains how to spend their money. And the
So they're
captains don't have
hamstringing
any
you
money to
along the
begin
way.
with.
Yeah.
Feels like they're
Yeah.
hamstringing you along the way with a lot of the rules and then demanding that you do things that you probably could have done if you weren't having to do these other things.
So I've always
While I understand why those rules would be put into place just to uh up the quality, like you had said, one of the concerns that you have with a lot of Metairie Mardi Gras is that it's felt like to you,
right.
it's homogenous to where on Monday you see the same float as you saw on Sunday, or
Right.
Tuesday will be the same float, that the same parade that you saw on
The 2 years
any given day.
after the 2 years after Katrina, they relaxed the requirements. And guess what? We had Mardi Gras.
Mhm.
Yeah,
They relaxed a lot of those requirements, and guess what? The parades were able to recoup. Most of them were. Some of us didn't, but I believe our downfall was our membership went to New Orleans. Okay,
yeah,
but with that, Mardi Gras still existed. Mardi Gras is still there, and they relaxed the rules, and it was okay. Um, they're just you can't have pretty without having money.
Mhm.
And the crews just didn't have the money. No one's going to pay $700 for dues to ride in a Metairie parade that doesn't look like Orpheus or doesn't look like Endymion. They want that wow factor.
yeah,
And until the crews get enough money to create the wow factor, they don't have the time to build it. Because okay, Jefferson Parish Council said now I have to have 10 bands with at least 50, 50 kids in uniform. Where am I going to get them? They're not in Jefferson Parish.
Mhm.
You might
yeah,
have two out of Jefferson Parish. Okay, so I've got to pay the $3,000. I've got to pay, now it's probably up to 4 or 5, because $3,000, I'm talking 10 years ago. So, and the bands need the money, the schools need the money. So you can't, it's not that we don't want to pay them. It's just that, okay, with float builder, we have to pay 10,000. Well, a float, a Matt Cantrell float, which is your average float, he probably charges about 4 to 5,000. All right. So if you think about it, pay, let's say it's 5,000, and you only have 10 members to put on that float. The dues for those 10 members isn't covering the cost of just that float. And that's
Right.
not including the $10,000 you had to pay for the insurance, or $20,000 you had to pay for insurance to insure the whole parade, because you got those idiots that fall off the float and they blame the crew. Now they drank and they were drunk, but you're going to blame the crew for it. And then you got, besides the insurance, you got the costumes. Okay, well, the costumes are running you, until the Chinese costumes came in. Costumes were running 75 to $100, right? When Karen Massett was making, and when that other guy, the guy that was doing Endymion before before Diane, they were charging 75 to $100 for a crew costume. All right, well, the Chinese costumes came in at $25. So, and you only give them a top, they wear their own blue jeans and stuff on the bottom, because you don't see the bottoms. So they eliminated half of the costume and the two-thirds of the cost. But still, you got the costumes, you got the tractor. Okay, the tractor rentals, you got to pay the tractor driver, right? So you're talking about another probably $800 to $1,000. So by the time you spent 5,000, 1,000, you're talking about a float, a small float, an average float is going to cost you 8 to 10,000, right? Okay, you have 20 of those. Well, they said you have to have at least 10 of those in your parade. That was the least amount I've seen Jefferson Parish allow.
Yeah.
You gotta have 10 floats. All right, so if each one of these floats, with all the expenses that go with it, when you combine everything, is $10,000 a piece. That's $100,000. Okay, that the captain has to come up with before the dance. Okay, before you pay the police, before you pay the garbage fees, before you pay the tow trucks. Um, you know, so then Jefferson Parish Council comes in and says, oh, we want it prettier. Okay, you need to have more flowers on the floats. You need to have more kids in your bands. We need more tow trucks. Oh, the tow trucks are going to do something different this year. They're not going to be in front of your parade. They're going to be before your parade, and they're going to be after your parade. You got to pay for all that. The captain has to be able to find a way to pay all that. All right.
Right.
So let's take Excalibur. How much are your dues in Excalibur? 250, 300?
I think I forget what it boils down to. Just crew dues, but like our I think our float pays like $600 with throws.
Okay, so you get a throw package. So you have a throw requirement along with your dues. And it's
Well,
Well, our particular
our
float does it.
particular float handles getting you X amount of beads on top of. We do have a throw package, $100 throw package, but like there's also something on
I want to say dues a
like the
300, 350 in that realm.
Yeah, I want to say it's about right.
how many people you have on your float? And you don't have to tell me exact, just
Ours is probably about 30.
Yeah, ours is fairly full. But
Yeah.
we've
because
had
all
the
the
same
friends and
kind of.
everything.
Right. Yeah, we've got a
Mhm.
tight knit group to where
Okay.
we've got a
several
lot of
years
people who have
running.
ridden several years
So-
now together.
So let's say that the dues are 350 and you have 30 people. So what does that equal?
That's 9, something like that. 9,000.
I majored in music, we only count to 4.
10,500, I
that's
think.
Yeah.
Come on.
I do math all day. I usually can do this earlier. But yeah.
10,500.
Yeah, it's got it.
10,500.
Yeah.
Yeah, 10,500.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So
even with the full float, we're by her
Okay,
numbers, we're pretty much
10,500.
breaking even. Mhm.
Okay. Excalibur's lucky because Diane's in Missy now is in a partnership with Phil Fricana. So he's your float builder, and they go in and together to pay for the floats, right? Now,
Right.
since he's your float builder and he's in an agreement with Excalibur, they probably don't pay that much for the floats, maybe 2,000-3,000. So when you add up that, so let's say the top end, it still costs him 5,000 because of all the flowers, because of everything he does on the float, right? Because y'all have beautiful floats.
yeah.
All right, so that's 5,500 left. Okay, so Missy's your costumer, so they get the Chinese costumes, probably $10 a piece. But if it's a normal crew, they're paying, let's say, 35 for a costume. Okay, then you've got only one company that will insure a crew. And I think that's stone. And so the insurance on each float might run about 4 or 5 thousand, just the insurance. Then you get
Yeah.
the tractor driver, the tractor itself, and then everything else that goes with it. So Diane was smart in making these agreements with Phil and with being the costumer. So Excalibur doesn't always have the same problems that, let's say, Zeus would have had, right? Well, no,
Right.
Zeus is a bad example because they had their floats. But say Atlas. So Danny is renting his floats from MAP at 5,000 apiece. He can barely, this is where the parish council doesn't understand why the captains lie. The captains have to lie, or there would not be a Mardi Gras.
Right.
Because if during the year that we would get a bulletin or a letter, now it would be an email saying, okay, do you have this taken care of? And you have to sign off on a letter. Okay, I have my insurance in place, and you have to prove it. Okay, I have 200 members, and you got to prove it. Okay, I have 10 floats. I sign off that. So the captain is lying. Most of the captains in Metairie were lying about the 200 membership to start off with. So unless you have 200 members, that's really the break even. That's what Jefferson Parish thought,
Yeah.
that you could not afford to put a parade on the street without at least 200 members. So that's where that number came from. And they're counting 20 members on a float, 10 floats times 20 members. And in their math, that would cover all your expenses. So maybe in a perfect world, if you were charging 500 for the dues, and you weren't a float builder yourself. And you see, this is where Phil Furcana and Diane's agreement, and then Matt Cantrell, and then any crew that's a crew started by the Kerns, because Blaine was involved in a couple of crews, right? So
Right.
he probably didn't charge them the rent, because to rent a Kern float was like 8 to 10,000.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's why
Significantly
Matt,
more.
right. So if you think about all these dollars, and then you're losing membership, they cause the captains to lie. They cause the crews to fail because the ordinances are dictating how the captains spend their money. So the captain is worried about the big picture, because when it comes down to that night and you're in Clearview's parking lot and you're getting inspected by the fire department, by the police department, by the parish, okay? And then the parish says, oh, well, we're going to have cameras at 3 or 4 different spots on the route, and we're filming your crew. And if your crew doesn't have a mask on every rider, if you don't have enough riders on the float, if you don't have this and that, we're going to fine you.
We're gonna find you. Yeah.
Okay. So the captains got all this in their head. They're like, okay, how can I rob Peter to pay Paul? Where is my personal liability? I mean, you got to remember, these are people who have stepped up to the plate, who don't
Yeah.
make a salary
Right.
for this full-time job, and here they are, the stress level. I never slept the week before my parade. By the time my parade came, I don't know how, my second year, I rode with pneumonia. I was so sick. In fact, Will Clark and Lisa Clark had a breakfast the morning of our parade at Metairie Country Club that I had so looked forward to. You know where I was? I was in bed at the Sheraton. It was the Sheraton right then. I was in bed with a police radio, with a radio with my officers, with a telephone to my family, because I was so sick I couldn't get up. It took my bodyguard and my son's bodyguard to actually get me up and put my costume on me. I was that weak. And how I went through the parade, I don't know. But I made it through. But there's so much
It's
work.
because Mardi
so much
Gras
stress.
heals all.
There you go. Yeah,
So
the
all
day
you gotta
after.
do is- All you gotta do
The
is
day
get
after
on
the
the
parade.
foot.
Yeah.
You're
The
good.
day after the parade.
But I can tell you, I don't know a captain yet that isn't, they're not full of stress because of
Yeah.
the big picture, because their head is on the line. For the
And really,
big
it's not
picture.
limited to Metairie either. That's
No, it's all
that
captains.
runs the gambit of every parade, because just because a parade's large hey, they have bigger bills, they still have to come up with those numbers. So
But you
yeah,
see, when you got that,
it's not a,
when you
it's
got that kind of
certainly
money
not.
coming in
Well,
though,
yeah, there's some crews that they're not worried about money,
right,
granted, but there's plenty that are. Even a lot of New Orleans ones aren't. They're not cash cows by any means. Like they
right.
may be doing okay
Mhm.
financially, but
It's just
running a
super.
parade is not
A cheap
with
venture. Yeah.
with the exception of a rare few for profit. You know what I mean?
I have to tell you how I met Blaine Kern. I was my very first. Am I talking too much? By the way,
No.
I'm
Mm.
sorry. When I get on these subjects, I just I apologize. Oh, I wanted to show you this too. My first
That's,
color
Oh,
one,
nice.
yeah.
and this was our second year when Will and Lisa were king and
King
queen.
and queen.
Yeah. Um, Henry Trapani says, okay, you're a permitted cat, or you'll be a permitted, because they don't give you your permit until after your parade, believe it or not. Um, so he goes, all right, we've agreed. Jason's going to roll. Jason's going to roll the second Friday night after Aquila of Mardi Gras. Um, you need to come to this meeting, that meeting, and this, all these meetings. And they gave me the calendar and all this. And I went to my first captain's meeting, which was held. Where was it held? I don't even remember. I just remember it being a big room. It was probably at the Yenny building. So I walk in and I sit down, and I didn't know. Did I know anybody in the room? I don't think I knew anybody in the room. Well, I knew Arvie Cosi because I wrote in Napoleon.
Hmm.
Okay. So Arvie's like, what are you doing here? I said, I'll tell you, you'll find out. Because Mr. Trapani wanted to introduce me and all that kind of stuff, right? And Dorothea, they wanted to make a big deal of the new cruise, right? Okay. So Blaine Kern's already in there. And Mr. Trapani starts the meeting. And Blaine stands up and says, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just don't think there should be any new crews in Jefferson Parish. And I think everyone in this room agrees with me. I think the new crews, whoever's the captain, needs to be told to break their membership up and split it between all the existing crews. I don't think there should be any new crews. And I think all of you in this building, in this meeting, agree with me. Right? Show your hands. And I didn't raise my hand. It's like, and why wouldn't you raise your hand? And I stood up and said, so nice to meet you, Blaine. I'm Melody Kirkwood. I'm the captain of the new crew.
Wow.
And he went, oh, honey, I'm so sorry. He could not do enough for me after that. And who was it? It was Bob. Carnisi was sitting next to me. He goes, and Maurice was sitting down. Y'all didn't get to meet Maurice. Maurice was the captain of Centurions. Maurice and Bob are sitting there talking. They said, I guess she's not renting her floats from the Kerns. Yeah, no, I'm with Carrollton. And so they're like, oh, okay. But that's how I met Blaine Kern. And I used to get mad at him because he would act like he represented all the captains. He didn't. You know, I know that someone came up with the name of Mr. Mardi Gras for him. But when I really got upset was, again, that night that I was watching that marathon after Katrina hit. And it was the Friday night. I was supposed to have my golf tournament that day. And I'm sitting here with that check from John Goodman and his wife. And I'm crying because it was a bad thing. Blaine Kern is on the news saying that he's Mr. Mardi Gras, representing all the captains in Mardi Gras captains, that we are not going to roll this year because it's not the right thing to do. I called him so freaking fast and said, don't you ever speak for me again. Don't you ever. And that's before I knew that he was dementia or whatever and going nuts.
Yeah.
But oh yeah. I mean,
to me that I give him a lot of respect as far as the beauty of his floats. I've never quite understood the whole Mr. Mardi Gras thing. That kind of I mean, to me, he's Mr. Mardi Gras. He's a nut job. But I say that in a good way. But like to me, it's like Cowboys fans being like, "Oh, we're America's team." Like, psh, no, you're not. You know, like,
Yeah,
it feels exactly like that to me.
yeah, I totally agreed, and I was so insulted because we weren't given the opportunity until we got back. Because remember, everything was closed. We couldn't come back to New Orleans. We couldn't come back to Jefferson Parish, and we're just sitting here. Everybody's evacuated. I mean, the captains are talking between us out. I mean, I'm sitting here talking to other captains in Jefferson Parish. I mean, someone's in Vegas, someone's in Florida, someone's in Utah. I'm in Texas. We're trying to figure out what we're going to do. And Jefferson Parish, I mean, we were very lucky. Mr. Trapani was very good. He was very good. He was very diplomatic, and he ran that Jefferson Parish Mardi Gras. I mean, he kept those captains in line. Let me tell you, he kept us in line. And when we would go into a meeting and didn't have one solo voice, like we didn't all agree, he'd made the decision and everyone had to agree. And his heart was in the right place, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dorothea Halligan, who was his right hand, Dorothea did everything she could to keep the peace between the captains. When Mike came in, certain captains that will go unnamed that uh, got some favors. Um, Mike was getting ready to run for office in Kenner, right? No comments on it, but there was, there was some people
She's got
that
dirt on
I
everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me know if I ever make you mad because you feel like you hold on to dirt on everybody. I don't know.
No,
You could probably get me a couple of different ways.
no,
No, I'm
it's
playing.
not dirt. It's things that happen, and
Yeah,
it's the stories of Mardi Gras that make Mardi Gras rich.
mhm.
Yeah.
It's the people in the background that make it happen. It's not the people who are on TV. I was just talking with him yesterday. I was mentioning one of the people speaking for Rex. I've been knowing him for maybe, let's see, my son's 28, so about 30 years. And I was surprised, oh, he's finally having a voice in Rex. But then it made sense to me because
Yeah.
his father was a king of carnival, his mother was a queen of carnival, his uncles were all either in Comus or Rex. I was like, oh, it's nice to see my age now, people
Yeah.
my age speaking for the older crews. So I was a
Because
little,
members of Rex are not allowed to speak for Rex. Like there's basically one voice of Rex.
well, right now there's about three of them because they had another thing on the news tonight. When they were talking, it was yesterday, when they were talking about the flags being donated to the two
Yeah, I
hotels.
saw that.
And that was another guy who spoke for him. And then last week it was Merritt Lane. And I know Merritt Lane. I used to work with him. But then again, the Joneses were very big in Comus and Rex. And now it's the Lanes, the Hugies, and the Joneses because they had so many kids and the kids married, That's why, so some of the girls, they have different names. But yeah, I mean, it's nice to see in the older crews, it's not the old man speaking, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's people
Yeah,
my
it's
age, the Westfelds, look how long he spoke, and I guess they're still involved. I would think, yeah, they were all born into Rex.
yeah.
But usually he spoke about, for the crew for many years. And I was surprised to see Merritt speaking for the crew and now one of the Westfelds.
Yeah, I don't think many people realize how close that crew really is as far as public
Thomas and Rex.
any sort of
I've heard
comment
it.
publicly. It's always been one or two people or the same person basically speak for Rex.
Yeah, but you
know,
gotta be born into it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
You're born into it or you marry into it.
yeah, but that's most people consider it the gold standard of parades, and that's hard to argue with. There's some titles that I think are ridiculous, but that one holds up.
Yeah.
And you see, I'm an old fashioned kind of gal.
Mhm.
I didn't agree when all the Dorothy May stuff happened. In fact, I was working at Canal Barge. I was working with Mary Lane when all that came to do. I didn't understand. I was first told it was a racial thing, but it wasn't. It was a sexist thing.
Yeah.
It was between male, female, and not black and white.
No, because most
know.
of those crews were interracial at that point anyway. So
Right.
it was always about more females, and that wasn't what was told at the time. And it was more like, well, using public money, so you have to allow everybody in. And like, I'm not sure about that because the crews are paying for everything. So I'm not sure what
Well,
public
they,
money they were
they,
using except for,
they pull the public money card when
Mhm.
it comes to the sanitation, the
Yeah,
fire, and
right.
the police. Um, and yeah, I mean, look, God, my stories. Harry Lee loved Mardi Gras.
Mhm.
No one was a bigger fan of Mardi Gras than Harry Lee. Come on. He
Yeah.
was he put his Jeep in every parade and was giving out white roses.
So how many of his magnets do you still have?
There you go. And look,
Yeah.
what was one of the first floats, one of the first commercial floats built in Argus?
The
The
Harry
Harry
Lee
Lee,
float.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. You couldn't get any bigger than Harry Lee. My daddy knew Harry Lee. My dad, when I was a baby or younger, had a frozen food business and he used to deliver the food to House Lee. So
Okay.
my daddy knew the Lee family from that. In fact, one of my dad's drivers came back once and said, I'm not delivering food there anymore. I can't go back there. My dad's like, what the hell? He goes, every time I go back, there's one less cat. He thought they were cooking cat. But he loved Mardi Gras and he would do anything for Mardi Gras. He really would. But a certain captain, who's still a captain in New Orleans, not in Metairie, um, sued him or tried to sue him over the sanitation fees. And what it was about is that this person had a crew that wasn't successful. And then he started another crew on the back of it. Okay. And something happened with the police. Now I don't know all the details. I just know a part of the story. But so there was a lawsuit and the captain lost and Harry won. I mean, have you known Harry to lose anything?
He
No.
wasn't going to lose
Right.
that.
All right, so he won the lawsuit. And there was a couple of things that happened from that. All of a sudden, any new crew had to pay a sanitation fee. And a sanitation fee would have been between 13 and 15,000. Okay. When I went, the story has a couple of prongs. When I went to get Harry's permission to have my crew, okay, we talked, like I said before, we talked about everything else but what I was there for until like the last minute or so. But in that conversation, he was like, you don't have this ego. And he said, I don't want you, he goes, if you have this permit, I don't want you to be in a bind to have to sue somebody or somebody sue you. So I'm going to pay your garbage fee. So Harry Lee paid Jason's sanitation fee. I never had to pay it. But that was because another captain put a guarantee against his house to pay it and couldn't pay it. And I think that was the premise of the lawsuit, but don't quote me because but the captain lost. And Harry goes, I don't want you to have to put a mortgage on your house or to put anything against your house that would take a roof from over your son's head to have a parade. He goes, that's just not what you should do. He said, so I'm going to make sure you're taken care of. But he wouldn't take care of the other captain. And that was because he didn't, you got to work with these people,
Yeah.
you can't go against them. And I was doing anything I was told to do. So that's how I was successful. I got the last permit that Harry Lee approved.
Oh, yeah.
I got the last one. And he wasn't going to allow anybody else. I mean, it took me 2.5 hours to talk to him, two and a
Right.
half hours on the floor in his office. But, it's, again, New Orleans was pretty much given carte blanche. You want to put a parade on? Okay, look at Ocean. Okay, how many years did Ocean ride with pickup trucks pulling floats, with no floats, with carriages? Okay, hardly any bands, but yet they're still parading today, right?
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you know how many years they didn't have a crew? And Orleans Parish lets them go in front of Pygmalion. Okay, so on Friday nights it was Pygmalion, and it was Ocean and Pygmalion. I think Pygmalion's what, Saturday nights now?
I think it's Sunday. night, isn't it?
Sunday?
No, Saturday night.
Saturday night. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, no,
so
they're after Carrollton, aren't they?
Yeah, they're Saturday night.
Carrollton.
Carrollton Sunday.
No, they're Saturday night. I promise you.
I believe you.
Yeah.
See, I don't argue. with
Saturday
you.
night. First Saturday night. Pygmalion. Sparta and Pygmalion.
Mhm.
So I mean, even Pygmalion at the beginning wasn't that good, but
Oh, look at
Orleans
Tux.
Parish let them
Remember
roll.
Tux like that, you know?
Mm.
Because I
Tux
can tell
was
you, the
a
year I
mess.
was queen, oh my God, I mean, it was okay. The weather was really bad. Things were flying. On my page, one of my pages on my float passed out for the whole parade. The little girl was so cold. She just sat on the bottom of the float and didn't move. My son swears to this day, if I ever tell him he has to wear ballet slippers and tights again, he'll kill me. But that was the reason why all my officers, they had those tops, but they wore pants.
Yeah.
Because my son would, he's like, Mom, no. So they wore the pants that went into the boots. But I mean, yeah, Mardi Gras changed a lot. I mean, but life has too, you know.
I think
Yeah.
a lot of it has changed for the better. There's some things I wish that would stay traditional. Uh, Especially, I'm not much of a ball guy, but I kind of feel like that should be
The
more or less
pageantry.
traditional.
Yeah.
The pageantry.
But yeah,
But see, that's the thing. You don't have the old Mardi Gras people putting it on anymore. You got
Yeah.
the younger people who are like, oh, I can put on an event. Oh, that's fine. I can, design centerpieces for tables, and I can make pretty dresses for these girls. They're going to pay me money to be out there, and then I can put some floats on the street. Um, and so, like again, it's going from members, a membership where
Mhm.
people know each other and do things together, to riders. I'll
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
pay and ride. Pay my fee, ride, throw some beads, get drunk on the float, have a good time, have a party time, the party atmosphere. I mean,
Yeah.
look, the extravaganza, the Bacchus, the
Bash.
event
Yeah.
at the Bacchus, you know, people, that's what they
Yeah.
want. It's a
Yeah.
different life.
Yeah. I mean, I can see that too. I think, that's like why I say I'm not much of a ball guy, because to me, they're very stiff. It's not a whole lot to it. But I do respect the old guard. I like the tradition of it. I have a lot of admiration and respect for. It's just kind of not something I would like to do personally. But
Yeah.
we need to keep it,
Well,
I
you
think
still
it's
have a
very
few
important
crews.
to keep it.
You got the balls that are just the debutante balls.
Mhm.
Then you got like Dr. Dave. Y'all know Dr. Dave? Have y'all interviewed him yet?
We haven't interviewed him yet, but I'm familiar.
Okay, that'll be an interesting interview.
Mm.
Dr. Dave became a captain a year after me. So I was one of the people he called. Can you tell me how to be a captain? And so going into his house is an adventure. It is.
Like,
It's
You didn't read the
perfectly
book
bold.
yet?
Pardon?
You didn't read the instruction manual yet?
Yeah, a little.
That
But
make life easier, huh?
yeah, super nice guy though.
Yeah.
Okay, and I didn't realize he wasn't. Um, let's put it this way: he would give the captain shots of vitamin B to help us get through. I don't know which captains take it, but Dave's a really nice guy, and he's got very well intentioned. But have you ever gone to Sparta's ball?
No.
No.
You got the seating in a square, right, like a U shape. You have the stage. Everyone is female in the front row, and they all have to wear white gloves. So if you're going to sit in front row at a Sparta ball, you're in a ball gown with white gloves. His sister, who lives out of state, has a dance school. So he brings in the dancers, the ballet dancers, every year. So you talk about a traditional old pageant, old ball, Sparta. So that one I could use a little updating. but I love
Yeah.
him. I mean, he's super sweet. Um, and then if you look at, if you really look at some of the balls in the 60s and 70s, and maybe some of the old line guys wouldn't agree. Um, but if you look at the Metairie parade balls, like the Zeus, the Jason, the Atlas, um, and some of the new ones, they still had some sense of fun,
Yeah.
some sense of um, including the crew.
Mhm.
It's not just about the court. Okay, to a lot of the balls now, it's about the court. And
Oh,
you
yeah.
got to put the court up there because the captain, the king and queen paid 20,000 apiece to be up there. So
Yeah.
it's got to be about them, right? Um, but I can remember when Jason, and as a little girl, and the games people play, that theme. I remember that the most. And there was a couple other ones that I was in, but the themes weren't as good. The games people play is the one I remember the most because they made fun out of it. So, like my dad's float was jacks. So when they came out for the ball, they're on the floor in the middle of the municipal auditorium playing jacks.
Yeah.
And they're handing out jacks to all these women in the gowns. The hula hoop guys, again, they were the heaviest, fattest guys in the crew, had to come out on the floor and do hula hoops. And as a little girl, I got to show them how to do the hula hoops. So
That had to be
it
a
was
train wreck.
right. It was fun.
Yeah.
It wasn't boring. They did the call outs and it was a surprise. Some of the women didn't know who sent them the invitation because it was an all male crew and they
Mhm.
would mail them a ball invitation and a call out, right? And then the gentleman in costume would come and pick you up from your seat and bring you to the middle of the floor and dance with you. And that's when you found out who your call out was with.
Mhm.
And they would give you a gift. It was the mystery, the fun, the surprise, the
See, that's to me
camaraderie.
an aspect that could be kept. That sort of thing with the call out and the invites and all that. That's great. I mean, but the
Made it
stiff
fun.
old guard to me, I don't. Besides the love of Mardi Gras, I don't really get that.
And in fact,
Uh,
someone I was working, we had a staff meeting today for work, and one of my coworkers who's involved in the house floats said, "Oh
Mhm.
yeah, well, if you want to be bored Mardi Gras night, make sure you look at, you pull up the last year's meeting of the courts." The only thing I
Yeah.
never liked about the meeting of the courts was the narrators.
Yeah. Okay.
I just think the
I've,
voice
I've
are a
I
little.
remember my grandmother vividly watching it every year. On the edge of her seat, she loved it. She was a very traditionalist as far as Mardi Gras. I'd
Oh,
like to see it at some point,
I
but
watch it every year because that's my closure.
Yeah.
yeah,
That's my closure.
I
But
just pass out. I'm done. by the time by the time the last truck float rides over here, we've seen 40 to 45 parades that year. I'm done. I'm going to get some chicken. I'm going to pass out. You know? So
absolutely.
I haven't seen any of those late ones in the longest time. And I remember maybe going to Comus at the end of the night on Mardi Gras night.
Oh yeah.
And it was
You're getting
very
your one pair
much,
of beads.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
very much adult parades. They didn't want to be there. And
If you
uh,
caught
it
one pair of
wasn't
beads at
pretty at
Thomas, you were
all.
doing great.
But they had a
Yeah.
doubloon, so we had to go. It was the
Oh yeah.
rule,
That was my mom.
But
That
it
was
was
my mom.
but it was a nice way to shut it down, to be honest. They couldn't have a big parade that night. It
Dorothy
felt
Mae took
right that
care
it
of
was a
that.
low key parade, and you just went, all right, it's over.
Yeah.
You know.
Dorothy Mae took care of that.
Hmm.
That was when Comus stopped parading.
Yeah.
Same way with Proteus, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Proteus sat out for several years.
Yeah. It is a shame. Absolute shame.
Yeah, I don't remember how many it was, but it was a handful that were lost that year.
Yeah.
Well, with the new ordinance, I should say.
And it was another change. And then Katrina came and there was another change. Then the pandemic will be another change, when we come back from this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the only thing is that some of the services for Mardi Gras are disappearing because those people are passing away.
Mhm.
And there's not a ton of costumers that want to step up to the plate. And if you
Yeah.
really want to do a really cool parade, you need a costumer that's actually going to make you costumes and match your theme. And a lot of that's gone away because of the Chinese stuff.
My
And
dream
again,
one day is to put together a parade and like just be a carbon copy of like one of the very early Rex or Comus parades riding down like Bourbon Street. I
or
just
even
absolutely
Hermes.
love to do that.
Yeah.
Like,
Hermes puts on
Yeah.
a
I
beautiful
mean,
parade.
Yeah.
carbon
Hermes is
copies
always a
of it.
beautiful
Mhm.
parade.
Their floats are the big pearls.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, I used to work for one of the officers. Well, I used to work. My background is marketing in oil and gas and marine. I used to work for Halter Marine as well, and I worked for one of the officers was a senior vice president. One day he calls me up. He goes, "Hey, I forgot to get limousines for the court for Hermes. Can you go find me some limousines because they're all rented in the city?" So it was like, oh my God. It's like 2 days before the parade. I'm like, are you nuts? But I found them. But yeah, I mean, it's some of the parades are absolutely gorgeous. Now, what gets me, I didn't see Muse's actual parade until after Jason stopped running, because you got to remember that was the week before my parade, and I was just working my ass off.
Right. Yeah.
I'm the duck on water, just paddling. I may look calm, but I'm sitting here. I got so much on my plate. So the year after Jason stopped parading, my friends took me. This first time I got to see Hermes in years, because Hermes rode in the same night as I did. And then I went to see Muses, and Nick's wasn't there yet. And so I went back to seeing the Uptown parades. And, you know, I was just so pleasantly surprised and pleased at how they looked. But when I saw Muses, damn, they're riding on boxes. Those floats have no character.
Mhm.
There was no big design. Yeah, sure, they had the shoe in the front. Okay, they had their signature float and a few signature floats. But the crew, the people who are paying the bill, are like sardines on the floats, wearing a
Yeah.
Chinese costume. They make their own headpiece, you know, and sitting on throws, and they're riding onto a box on top of a box. I'm just,
Yeah,
I,
it's steadily grown over the years. The signature floats have been added to, and they've become much more elaborate and I think. But yeah, the crew floats haven't quite caught up to the beginning is really spectacular, but after that, it kind of drops off in a hurry. But
now
it's a
I
real
always,
nice parade, and
yeah,
I'm getting a shoe. I don't care if I have to knock over some little girl, Yeah,
I know how to
have
make
to have.
them.
No, that doesn't count. No.
I made about 500 sunglasses last year.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God, yes. Because Iris throws sunglasses. And let me tell you, I didn't get to throw half of them.
Yeah.
I didn't get to throw half of them. The parade went like that.
Ah.
I couldn't see anybody I knew, and but hey, I'm not complaining because I got to roll.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Muses got caught in the middle, and they didn't. I have friends that spent all that money for Muses, and they went home with their throws if they could get them off the float.
Yeah.
That was the
Same
other
with
thing
same
last
with
year.
Nick's. I mean, Nick's was in route when they got shut down. So
Yeah,
that's
and if you would have gone back to that lot across from Mardi Gras World, that's over on Chapatoulas, like when you turn off of the I-10, um, if you would have gone to that lot that night, maybe like 2 or 3 in the morning after, you could have got any throws you wanted
yeah.
because some of the floats had to go to the next parade.
You
Yeah.
tell me this now.
And they were the guys that were cleaning the floats were just throwing the throws over the side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then like Zulu's floats, they'd like to bring their floats in a few days early, because they take a couple of days to fill, right, to load.
Mhm.
And there was already throws in the parking lot, like stacks and stacks and stacks of throws.
Mhm.
So I'm surprised some of the Muse's throws didn't come off, and Nick's, didn't come off of Zulu's float.
I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't, you know.
Yeah, and you can't blame them. I mean, why not? The stuff's sitting there.
Yeah,
I mean, most of the riders
better for it
are
to get
out of
thrown than get
town,
thrown
they're not
away.
bringing them home, you
And,
know.
but I feel sorry for the people who paid for it,
Oh yeah,
who didn't get to pull them off the float that night because
Yeah.
there wasn't time. There wasn't
Right.
time. And I mean, you got,
yeah. I
someone
heard a
pays
lot.
the
I
half
heard
off. It's
several
not the
of.
free show on earth people think it is.
No, no, no. I mean, like we ride in a small parade, but it's still it's a pretty penny by the time you're done, you know. But
So what
I
are
feel
the,
like it's worth it.
so what are they doing? So you had to pay dues this year? Do you
Well,
have
we
to
were
wait
Yeah,
we
till-
were
we had
paying
already
them
paid
in
'em.
preparation that
Yeah,
you know,
I'm not
in
sure.
anticipation, just like you said, as you're paying, you're usually paying damn near like the day that you get off of the float the previous year. You're starting to do your payments, and by September, Octoberish area, you're usually pretty much paid up.
Mhm.
They were allowing a little bit of
Yeah.
padding time for that because of the uncertainty of everything. And then when it was decided that Jefferson parades wouldn't roll during traditional Mardi Gras season, then it was kind of in anticipation of maybe we would get to roll during that Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah,
But now, I mean,
yeah. Not
the
happening.
crew is just holding on to the money, until next year. And they said, I mean, obviously, if, uh, I want to say that they had said something along the lines of, if you don't feel comfortable riding the following year, let us know and we can do something to help you with a refund or to trade off your spot to somebody else or what have you.
Right.
But
And I'd heard several of the New Orleans crews were doing $100, $200, just to cover their expenses, but not
yeah,
necessarily charging the whole, whatever their
Well,
dues
yeah.
actually are. So, you still have to cover the expenses, or a lot of parades will fold, especially
Right.
Metairie, I don't know how a lot of them can stay above water now, much less losing a year. So,
Yeah.
but well, hey, it
Okay.
feels like we could go to a bar and have about a case of beer to talk about Mardi Gras with you, but we're
yeah,
running a little long here.
I'm
So
sorry.
yeah. No. It's
I apologize.
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Get her back for part 2.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
We'll have
yeah,
to bring one of your mutual friends on, and we can hear y'all be mad at each other for, hey, you did this to me, and like, no, but you helped me this day. So
Yeah.
I
No,
think that'd be a fun
I
thing
was
to do.
never a captain to get in any kind of conflict with someone
Yeah.
else.
Mhm.
For the most part, like I said, my whole thought process behind everything I did was for the good of Mardi Gras and the good of my
Yeah.
crew.
and
And
that's why we do this show, is that we're hoping, to educate people more about Mardi Gras, give them more of the history of Mardi Gras and the different crews that are with us today, crews that rolled at one time, different organizations that
Mhm.
play a part in that Mardi Gras story,
yeah,
you know.
and you see you haven't even touched on the tip of the iceberg. Because
Right.
we
Yeah.
talk about a lot of, like for instance, I've known Arthur Hardy since I was 12 years old, way
Mhm.
before
Yeah.
the Mardi Gras stuff, and all the stuff that he's involved in. And like I said, I recommend that you try to talk to Carrie Massett. Um, she's one of the last big costumers, and I think she retired this year. And she was doing Carrollton and Rex, and and before they die off.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the thing. I mean, every time I turn around, we're losing somebody, and
That
these,
was a little of our inspiration to get going. There was several that we would talk about, like, Blaine, and a lot of those guys are just getting older, and love to hear those stories.
And you
but,
see, Blaine wasn't the only game in town.
right.
That's the
Right.
thing.
But
You
it
know,
was
you had Massey,
it
you had
was clear
Cantrell,
that
and
it's
we talked
becoming
about
time,
Cantrell. Yeah. And then you got Louis for Canada now.
Mhm.
And his floats
Yeah.
are gorgeous. I tried to get his floats my last year, but unfortunately I didn't have enough membership to use his floats.
Yeah.
But oh my God, he does a beautiful job.
Yeah.
He really does. And then I think, I don't know what name they're going by right now. Carrollton would know. But the people that worked for Lewis Massett, I believe, at least in the years that after he gave it up or after Katrina, the people who worked for him were still doing Carrollton's floats.
Yeah.
And they've made another company. I don't know if it's Royal Artist or
Yeah.
I don't
but
think it's Royal. I want to say.
it might not be them,
I
but it
don't
was
recall who it is, but
the Royal Artist is what does Rex. But these people are still doing floats, and they're the guys that are on the line. You know, they're the ones
Yeah.
that are making it happen. Besides the
I
captain,
think Royal Artists really do a fantastic job too. I mean, there's a few float companies that when they build a parade, it's just spectacular.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Like
I
who
mean,
does
Orpheus.
Cleopatra? Like I've noticed how
Well,
just gorgeous those are lately.
Lewis Massett did Cleopatra and designed her signature, the barge.
Okay.
He did all of that. He did the Hydra for
Mhm.
Caesar. He also did all of Pegasus. If you remember, Pegasus
Oh yeah.
had a lot of
Mhm.
signature floats because when we went into Lewis's warehouse, we were looking at props, right? We went into Lewis's warehouse and there was Chudy's barge because they even offered me I could have rented Chudy's barge, but I didn't want to.
Oh,
Um,
it's at floats in the Oaks right now. We passed by it last Sunday. We went. It's
yeah,
nice, but it's kind of depressing too.
right.
It
Well,
was actually kind of fun though. We were the last one in line Sunday, so a cop got behind us, and we were the end of the parade. And he had his lights on the whole time. I was like, "We're
well,
the end of the parade."
my girlfriends I have friends that we're still friends after 50 years. I'm going to be 60 next month. And most of my friends are my age, right? I'm talking about people that I went to high school, elementary school, people who I grew up in the neighborhood with. I got some girls I've been knowing since I was 4 years old. And we still go out to Galatoire's and eat once like a year. We might go to Galatoire's, might go to Arno's. Well, 2 weeks ago, they came and took me to have a po' boy at Phil's because I don't know if you know, but I had a stroke in May. And I'm because of complications, unfortunately I can't drink because my meds won't let me drink. And so I've been lucky that I have a wonderful job and I get to work remotely from home. And so that's been I've been lucky that I've been able to maintain my job and keep everything. And I love my job. I love who I work for. But so I haven't, besides not being able to go out because of COVID, I'm one of those people that they say shouldn't go out because most likely to catch it. So I'm always
Yeah.
petrified. I wear a mask everywhere. But anyway, so my friends have rented a 24 passenger bus. And so Sunday we're going to eat at we're meeting at the shrimp lot. Okay. I'm like, I've got to drive from Slidell to the shrimp lot. So we've got a 24 person bus. We all chipped in to rent and we're going to take a tour of the house floats. So I can't wait. Unfortunately, there's going to be champagne and all that. I will be drinking Sprite Zero, um, which is what I live off of now. But I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's absolutely fabulous the way the general public, and I'm sure that some of these people are actually crew members in something or
Yeah, you
involved
can
in
tell.
crews. Yeah.
Most
Now,
of them
Phil
celebrate
Furcana,
their. Most of them
yeah,
are celebrating their cruise, which is
and
great.
look at Phil Furcana. He's been selling the flowers and everything. He
Yeah.
charges $50 for a flower, and he's actually making a living off of doing that since he can't do the floats. And so you can see his work around town, but then other people's too. I have to applaud everybody for doing that. And if you saw the news tonight, they were actually covering on Fox. People have taken this internationally. So
Oh
happy
yeah.
worldwide, you
Yeah.
know.
When I looked at the map of the crew of house floats, I saw that there was some in Australia, Abu Dhabi.
Yes, they did Abu
Um,
Dhabi on the TV tonight.
Yeah, they have
China.
they have them in all kinds of
Singapore.
different countries, and I think that in every U.S. state they have a representation.
And
In
blame that
fact,
on Katrina.
yeah. Well,
Probably.
in fact, a friend of mine, I have friends that live in Austin, and when I started telling them about it, and I showed them the map, they looked at the map and they were like, "Whoa, there's one that's like 2 miles up the road from me." So last weekend they were doing a tour to go see the 7 or 8 of them that are around them.
Well, I think Frank does something at his restaurant. I think Brightston said something. You need to interview him too.
Yeah,
You need to find out if he's Bacchus Rider,
yeah,
because I bet you he is. And I was QP too. He was Bacchus Rider, and people would ask Arthur Hardy questions. And this is back before Arthur was computer literate, or
Mhm.
he dealt with computers, and we were the experts in Mardi Gras. We would actually answer the questions. But I don't remember. It was on one website. But I've forgotten more than I can remember. But I
yeah.
still remembered a lot. But
Well,
yeah, please I love that you're doing this. I wish it was, wish we had 20 million hours to talk about it. But
right, yeah,
It
there's a lot
doesn't,
of
there's nothing
people,
to say that we can't do another. You know?
yeah, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
But there's, so many people are passing that
Yeah.
we need to capture that.
yeah,
Because again, if you use the example, compare an old crew to these new crews, there's different reasons why these new crews form, and they're not always because of being Mardi Gras people.
yeah,
Yeah, but that's also, why the membership on some of the old guard parades are so strict, because they want to keep them that way. I
right.
have I have faith that those parades are going to be the way they are. Maybe make some slight improvements as times goes by, but
I
I
am
see
all
I
for
see
it.
the traditional and the new parades being strong.
I am all for let a parade be the parade.
Hmm.
yeah,
Let Mardi Gras be Mardi Gras. Like I
Yeah, I
said,
don't want to. I'm sort of a party animal, but I don't want Mardi Gras just being a debaucherous party. There,
yeah.
I do like the celebrations and that kind
Where's
of
the New
thing that goes
Orleans in
with
it?
it.
It's
Exactly.
yeah,
not just about having a
I don't
party
want it
and
a
getting
spring
drunk
break.
right.
You know.
Put the heritage, if you embrace it, is really rich.
Mhm.
yeah,
And no two parades should be alike. And that's the problem with Metairie, is that they're all alike.
Yeah.
I really do believe that. And I believe that New Orleans had the right idea, or the commission, or the committee that controls the parades had the right idea with let a parade be a parade. And they had to have that idea because Ocean would have never survived, Pygmalion wouldn't have survived. These other parades that started off with small little nucleuses where the captains didn't have to lie about how many members they really had. Let them let them put poop out. So what? People are complaining. They're getting
yeah,
beat for free. They're getting entertained for free,
Yeah.
and the people who are riding are having a good time. And let it go. As long as they're not breaking any laws or anybody's getting hurt, let Mardi Gras be Mardi Gras.
Yeah.
exactly.
But they got to stop telling the captains how to spend a little bit of money they have, and let the captains run their business the way they need to run it. And then guess what? It's going to grow. So and right now, like you said,
It's
you
either
still
they
have
grow or fail.
participation.
If they put out a good parade that people will join, it'll grow.
Right,
If it's no good, it'll go naturally, and another
right,
one will replace it. And I hate to
exactly.
be callous like that, but that's just the way it is.
It's the
It,
natural
it,
progression.
mhm.
Yeah,
But I
well,
appreciate y'all having me, and
yeah,
um,
Absolutely.
if
yeah.
you ever
We
want to have
appreciate
me,
you coming on and telling us, telling us a little bit of the story behind the Knights of Jason, and a lot of the stories that you have regarding, the history of Mardi Gras, not only in New Orleans but in the Jefferson Parish area too. Which to be honest, there's not a lot of places where you can find information about
especially
the
Metairie.
history of Metairie Mardi Gras.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I lived through it. So
Yeah,
my experience,
It's a rich history too. So
yeah,
it
needs to
really
be
is.
told.
And if you really look at the history of it, it was friends coming together.
Mhm.
yeah,
That's what it all was. And it wasn't for money. It wasn't to have the biggest and best. It was to bring families together and do things as a family unit and have fun. And I really think, unfortunately, yeah, Mardi Gras may be bigger and better in New Orleans, whatever, but I don't want us to lose that. I really don't. And
Yeah.
that was what I was trying to accomplish. But Katrina had other ideas for us. But
Yeah.
I do miss my friends to Mardi Gras that I don't see anymore. And I miss my crew. I don't miss all the work,
Yeah.
but I'm like many other people. I have a love for it, and I respect it, and I applaud all the crews and captains that keep it rolling. I really do. No matter what, I respect them all. Because without them, we wouldn't be here.
exactly, exactly.
And
So,
it contributes a lot to the city. So hopefully next year will be bigger and better, and it'll be more fun, and we'll have the families come back, and we'll have more visitors to the city, and the city of New Orleans won't have to furlough their police department, and they'll be able to pay them and their fire, and hopefully they'll come back bigger than ever. That's what
Yeah.
my wish is. So
Yeah,
you all
same
keep
here.
up the good work and keep it going.
thank you.
Thank you.
So again, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Signing out. We'll see you out on the route.
Sounds
Happy
good.
Mardi Gras.
Right.
Happy Mardi Gras.
Happy Mardi Gras.